I am Maya, 35 years old, and my own sister just tried to extort my entire life's work over a wedding bill. After I flatly refused to fund her $74,000 extravagant wedding, she invited me to what she promised would be a casual reconciliation dinner. But when I walked into the upscale restaurant, I did not find a sister ready to make peace. Instead, I found her sitting with her arrogant fiancé and three aggressive corporate lawyers. "Sign this or we will ruin your company," she threatened, sliding a massive 50-page lawsuit across the table. She had absolutely no idea that my husband was standing right in the shadows behind them, holding a single manila folder that was about to shut down her entire world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you and take advantage of your success. The air inside. L'amour was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, expensive truffles, and quiet privilege. The lighting was deliberately dim, casting long, elegant shadows against the velvet booths and polished mahogany tables. I had chosen to wear a tailored charcoal suit straight from my office, my hair pulled back into a sleek professional bun. I built my boutique crisis management firm from the ground up, dealing with cutthroat executives, corporate espionage, and public relations disasters on a daily basis. Walking into a high-end restaurant did not intimidate me in the slightest. What did give me a slight irritating knot in my stomach was the prospect of dealing with my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was 28 years old and the undeniable golden child of our family. Growing up, our parents, Vernon and Patricia, had catered to her every whim. They were obsessed with status appearances and the desperate need to prove they belonged among the city's elite. Chloe absorbed this toxicity like a sponge, growing into an entitled adult who believed the world owed her a lavish lifestyle. I, on the other hand, was the designated family scapegoat. I was the one who worked two jobs to pay my own way through a state college while they drained their savings to fund Chloe's failed business ventures and designer wardrobe. I was the difficult child simply because I refused to hand over my hard-earned money whenever Chloe overspent. As I approached the hostess stand, I spotted them in a secluded, oversized booth near the back wine cellar. Chloe was wearing a silk designer dress that I knew cost more than her monthly rent, her posture practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. Sitting next to her was her fiancé, Preston Sterling. Preston was a 32-year-old heir to a supposedly wealthy old-money real estate development family. He was white arrogant and carried an air of unearned superiority that permeated every room he entered. He looked at me the way a king looks at a peasant, a gaze filled with absolute condescension and dismissiveness. But they were not alone. Three men in immaculate pinstripe suits sat across from them, their expensive leather briefcases resting ominously on the pristine white tablecloth. My intuition, honed by years of managing corporate sabotage and hostile takeovers, instantly flared. This was not a reconciliation dinner. This was an ambush. I approached the table with slow, deliberate steps, refusing to show even a hint of hesitation. Chloe looked up, a sickeningly sweet smile spreading across her face. "Maya," she chirped, her voice carrying an artificially bright tone over the low hum of the restaurant. "So glad you could make it. Have a seat." I did not sit immediately. I looked at the three men, then at Preston, who was swirling a glass of expensive bourbon with a highly satisfied expression. I was under the impression this was going to be a casual family dinner. I said, my voice steady and measured, cutting through the pleasantries. "Who are your guests?" Preston chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. "Take a seat, Maya," he commanded, gesturing vaguely to the empty chair across from him. "These gentlemen are from my family's legal team. We have some serious business to discuss, and we prefer to get straight to the point." I slid into the leather booth, keeping my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The lead lawyer, a man with graying hair and cold, shark-like eyes, pushed a thick, heavy document across the table toward me. It landed with a soft thud right next to my water glass. "What is this?" I asked, not bothering to reach for it. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice and greed. "It is an invoice, Maya. For my wedding, $74,000, and a binding settlement agreement." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer audacity of her demand. A settlement agreement for what I told you 3 weeks ago. I am not paying for your extravagant wedding. You and Preston wanted a cathedral ceremony and a country club reception, so you can figure out how to pay the vendors yourselves. Preston placed his hand over Chloe's, looking at me like I was a stubborn, unintelligent child. It is not just a bill anymore, Maya. It is a legal demand. That document outlines a comprehensive lawsuit we are prepared to file against your crisis management firm first thing tomorrow morning. We are suing you for defamation and tortious interference with the Sterling family business. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Defamation. I have not spoken a single word about your family's business to anyone. I do not even care about your business or your real estate developments. The lead lawyer tapped the thick document with a manicured finger. We have sworn statements from witnesses who will claim otherwise. A public lawsuit of this magnitude would be utterly disastrous for a boutique firm like yours. We know your clients value absolute discretion and stability. A messy, highly publicized legal battle with a powerful family like the Sterlings would ruin your reputation overnight. Your clients would drop you, your contracts would be canceled, and your business would crumble. I looked at the document, then back at my sister. So you are trying to extort me. You are threatening to file a frivolous, completely fabricated lawsuit to destroy my company unless I pay for your wedding. We are offering you a generous way out, Preston said, leaning back and crossing his arms. You pay the $74,000 by Friday to cover the remaining vendor balances. Additionally, you will sign over a 15% equity stake in your firm to me, as compensation for the emotional and professional damages your hostility has already caused us. I felt a cold, deep-seated anger settling into my bones. For 35 years, I had endured the toxic dynamics of my family. I remembered the endless lectures from my mother, Patricia, telling me I needed to learn my place and support my sister. I remembered my father, Vernon, demanding I hand over my first corporate bonus to help Chloe pay off her credit card debt. They had conditioned Chloe to believe that my success belonged to her, that my hard work was simply a resource for her to exploit. You owe us this, Maya, Preston sneered, echoing the exact toxic rhetoric my parents had fed him. You have always been the selfish, difficult child. Chloe has told me everything about how you treat your family. You sit in your fancy downtown office hoarding your wealth while your own sister struggles to pay for the most important day of her life. It is time you finally paid your dues and showed some respect to this family. Chloe nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with vindictive triumph. Mom and Dad always said you lacked family loyalty. They told me you would try to ruin my happiness because you are bitter and jealous of my relationship with Preston. Well, you are not going to ruin my wedding. You have money. You have a highly successful business. It is only fair that you share it with me. If you do not sign that paper right now, Preston's lawyers will file the suit tomorrow morning, and your precious company will be tied up in litigation for years. You will lose everything. I looked at the 50 pages of legal threats lying on the table. Years of sweat, tears, and relentless grind had gone into building my firm. I remembered the early days operating out of a tiny, windowless office, taking on impossible cases just to make a name for myself in a fiercely competitive industry. I remembered the sleepless nights, the grueling negotiations, the sheer willpower it took to prove that an African American woman could outsmart the most aggressive corporate predators in the city. And now my own sister, a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life, thought she could simply snap her fingers and steal a piece of my empire. She thought the presence of 3 expensive suits and a white man with old money ties would intimidate me into submission. She thought I would cower and write a check just to keep the peace, exactly like I used to do when we were younger. I slowly reached for my wine glass. The crystal felt cool and grounding against my fingers. I took a deliberate, unhurried sip of the Cabernet, savoring the rich, dark flavor. The 3 lawyers watched me, expecting to see signs of panic. Preston watched me, expecting capitulation. Chloe watched me, expecting a complete breakdown. I carefully set the glass back down on the coaster, making sure it was perfectly centered. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the heavy, uncomfortable tension. The restaurant murmured around us, filled with the clinking of silverware and soft jazz music, completely oblivious to the warfare happening at our table. You know, Chloe, I finally said, my voice dangerously calm and entirely devoid of fear. You put a lot of effort into this little ambush. You brought a wealthy fiancé. You brought 3 expensive lawyers. You brought a 50-page document full of terrifying legal threats. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table, locking eyes with my sister. You are right about one thing. I should have brought representation for a meeting like this. Preston smirked, reaching into his tailored suit jacket to pull out a heavy silver pen. Glad to see you are finally being reasonable. Sign the bottom of page 47, and we can all move on with our lives. I did not take the pen. I just smiled a genuine, terrifying smile and looked past Preston's shoulder toward the dimly lit bar area of the restaurant. Luckily, I said, raising my voice just enough to carry over the ambient music. I brought my husband, and Jamal does not take kindly to people threatening my life's work. The heavy oak door of the private wine room swung open with a soft click, and Jamal stepped into the amber light. He moved with the effortless grace of a man who spent his life dismantling the financial empires of people exactly like the ones sitting across from me. Jamal wore a tailored navy suit that matched the intensity of his gaze, his presence instantly shifting the atmospheric pressure in the room. He did not rush. He did not look angry. He simply walked over and stood right behind my chair, resting one large, warm hand perfectly on my shoulder. Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Oh, please," she whined, leaning her head onto Preston's shoulder. "You brought your accountant husband to a legal meeting, Maya. This is pathetic even for you. We are talking about corporate law and defamation. We are talking about destroying your little crisis firm. Your husband cannot save you from the Sterling family attorneys." Preston chuckled, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of amusement and utter disdain. "Look, man," Preston said, his voice dripping with that familiar unearned privilege. "I do not know what kind of numbers you crunch in your cubicle, but you are completely out of your depth here. These 3 gentlemen represent the Sterling real estate enterprise. We have judges on speed dial. We own half the commercial properties in this city. You taking a stand is cute, but it is not going to stop us from seizing 15% of your wife's company if she refuses to pay for our wedding. So why do not you pull up a chair, sit quietly, and let the adults finish their business?" The lead lawyer, the one with the cold shark eyes, decided to join in on the intimidation tactics. He adjusted his gold cufflinks and leaned across the table, fixing Jamal with a hard stare. "Mr. Davis, I presume," the lawyer said, his tone slick and menacing. "Let me be perfectly clear. My firm has crushed businesses 10 times the size of your wife's little agency. The Sterling family has limitless resources to keep you tied up in litigation until you are both completely bankrupt. You do not want to play this game. I suggest you advise your wife to sign the settlement agreement and pay the $74,000 right now." I remained perfectly seated, taking another slow sip of my wine. I did not waste my breath arguing. I did not feel the need to defend myself or my husband. In my line of work, dealing with high-profile crisis management, I faced down aggressive corporate predators every single day. I had learned long ago that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and true power never has to shout. I simply watched, completely unfazed, as my family dug their own graves. Jamal did not raise his voice. He did not puff out his chest or respond to Preston's childish insults. Instead, he reached inside his tailored jacket and slowly pulled out a single, remarkably thin manila folder. It looked almost fragile compared to the massive 50-page legal threat they had slammed down in front of me just moments ago. Jamal bypassed Preston entirely and looked directly at the lead lawyer. "You talk a big game about limitless resources," Jamal said, his voice smooth, low, and terrifyingly calm. "But you see, I do not just crunch numbers in a cubicle. I am a forensic accountant. I specialize in tracking hidden assets, untangling offshore corporate structures, and dismantling complex financial fraud for federal investigations. When my wife told me her sister's fiancé was demanding cash to pay for a wedding, I found it curious. A man with supposedly limitless old money resources should not need to extort his future sister-in-law for $74,000. It made me wonder what the Sterling family finances actually look like beneath the surface. Preston's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, scoffing loudly. "You are bluffing. You have no idea who you are dealing with." Jamal ignored him. He gently tossed the thin manila folder onto the center of the table. It landed right on top of their bulky extortion document with a soft, definitive slap. "I suggest you open that," Jamal said to the lead lawyer. "Because before you threaten to sue my wife for tortious interference and defamation, you need to understand exactly what kind of liability you are sitting next to." The room suddenly felt very small. Chloe looked confused, glancing back and forth between Preston and the lawyers. Preston tried to maintain his posture of bored superiority, but a tight muscle was working in his jaw. The two junior lawyers looked at their boss, waiting for his lead. The lead attorney let out a dismissive breath, attempting to brush off Jamal's confidence. "This is a pathetic intimidation tactic," he muttered. But his curiosity won out. He reached out with a manicured hand, flipped open the cover of the thin manila folder, and began to read the top page. I watched his face closely. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face all evening vanished completely. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes darted frantically across the text, scanning the highlighted paragraphs and the attached financial routing numbers. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, catching the dim amber light of the restaurant. "What is it?" Preston asked, his voice suddenly losing its bravado. "What did he give you? Tell him it is garbage." The lawyer did not answer Preston. He turned the page with trembling fingers, his breathing suddenly shallow and rapid. He read the second page, then the third. He was looking at highly classified, heavily verified forensic evidence. "I did not know exactly what Jamal had found yet, but I knew my husband's work. If Jamal placed a folder on a table, it was not a threat, it was an execution." Chloe slammed her hand against the table, her diamond engagement ring clinking against the wood. "Stop reading whatever that is and make her sign the papers. You work for us. Tell her she has to pay for my wedding right now." The lead lawyer slowly looked up from the folder. He did not look at Chloe. He did not look at me or Jamal. He turned his head slowly to look at his two junior associates. He pushed the folder slightly toward them, tapping a specific line of text with a shaking finger. The two younger men leaned in to read. Within seconds, their expressions mirrored their boss. Pure, unadulterated panic. Preston slammed his fist on the table, rattling the wine glasses. "I asked you a question. What are you looking at? Give me that folder." He reached across the table to grab the documents, but the lead lawyer snatched the folder away, holding it tightly to his chest like a shield. He stared at Preston, and the look in his eyes was no longer subservience to a wealthy client. It was absolute horror and self-preservation. The lead lawyer frantically whispered to his colleagues. The words were too low for Chloe to hear, but I caught fragments. Federal, monitored accounts, immediate withdrawal. The three men began aggressively shoving their own 50-page extortion documents back into their leather briefcases. They were moving with a chaotic, desperate energy, knocking over a water glass in their haste. Water spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric, but none of them cared. "What are you doing?" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching up into a hysterical whine. "You cannot leave. We are supposed to be taking her company. Make her pay for my flowers." The lead lawyer snapped his briefcase shut with a loud, echoing crack. He stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He looked down at Preston Sterling, his face devoid of any professional courtesy. "We no longer represent you," the lawyer stated coldly, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the dining room. Preston stood up, his face flushing dark red. "You cannot do this. You have worked for my family for 20 years. I am paying you to destroy her." "You are not paying us anything," the lawyer shot back, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "And as of this exact second, our firm has no association with the Sterling family enterprise. Do not contact our offices. Do not call my private line. We are done." Without another word, the lead lawyer turned on his heel and marched toward the exit, his two associates rushing right on his heels like fleeing refugees. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung shut behind them, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in their wake. The silence that stretched across the table was so absolute, I could hear the faint, frantic ticking of Preston's expensive watch. Chloe's mouth hung open, her eyes darting between the closed oak doors and my calm, steady face. She looked like a child who had just realized the monster under the bed was real, and it was sitting right across from her. Her perfect, smug composure had entirely evaporated, replaced by a raw, unfiltered confusion that she could not comprehend. She had always relied on other people to fight her battles, using our parents as a shield, and Preston's supposed wealth as a sword. Now she had nothing. Jamal remained standing behind me, his hand still resting gently on my shoulder. His thumb traced a slow, calming circle against my collarbone, a silent communication of unwavering support. I had spent my entire youth feeling entirely alone, constantly defending myself against a family that viewed my independence as a threat. But I was not alone anymore. I had built a life, a business, and a marriage fortified with absolute trust and competence. Preston slowly sank back down into the leather booth. The arrogant posture, the puffed-out chest, and the condescending sneer were completely gone. He stared blankly at the spot on the table where his high-powered attorneys had been sitting just moments before. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he finally looked up at Jamal, the man he had just tried to dismiss as a mere cubicle worker. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. The extortion documents were gone, the intimidation was over, the ambush had spectacularly failed. And as I looked at my sister trembling in her expensive silk dress, I knew this was only the beginning of their reckoning. We did not say another single word to the people sitting at the table. Jamal simply placed his warm hand on the small of my back and guided me away from the booth. We walked out of the private dining room, leaving Preston and Chloe sitting in the absolute wreckage of their own arrogance. As we passed the host stand near the entrance, I paused just long enough to inform the manager that we would be splitting our check and the panicked couple in the back would be covering the 4 bottles of vintage champagne they had ordered before we even arrived. I knew Chloe's credit cards were already maxed out, and Preston was notorious for conveniently forgetting his wallet when it was time to actually pay for anything. They could wash dishes in the back for all I cared. The drive back to our townhouse was incredibly peaceful. Jamal did not ask me if I was okay because he already knew I was perfectly fine. We had planned for every possible contingency when dealing with Preston, but watching the Sterling family lawyers literally trip over their own briefcases to escape that room had been far more satisfying than either of us could have anticipated. We went home, poured a glass of water, and prepared for the inevitable fallout. I knew my parents would not let this go quietly. They never did. The next morning, I arrived at my downtown office at 7 sharp. My workspace was a direct reflection of my mind. It was orderly, highly efficient, and wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the waking city skyline. I had built this crisis management firm to handle massive public relations disasters for high-net-worth individuals. That meant my reception area was specifically designed to be an impenetrable fortress of calm. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Kira, knew exactly how to handle aggressive reporters, angry shareholders, and frantic executives, but absolutely nothing can quite prepare a person for the sheer unhinged entitlement of my parents. The breach happened just before 10 in the morning. I was in the middle of reviewing a sensitive press release for a client when I heard a sudden loud commotion in the outer hallway. The heavy glass door to my private suite flew open, bouncing off the rubber wall stop with a violent thud. My mother, Patricia, marched into the center of my office like a general surveying a conquered territory. She was wearing a matching tweed skirt suit, her hair perfectly pressed, clutching a designer handbag that I knew for a fact she had purchased on credit. My father, Vernon, followed closely behind her, his posture rigid with manufactured authority. Kira was right on their heels, holding her hands up apologetically. "I am so sorry, Maya," she said, her voice tight with stress. They bypassed security in the lobby and completely refused to wait in the reception area. I waved Kira off, giving her a reassuring nod. "It is fine, Kira. You can close the door. I will handle this." As the glass door clicked shut, my parents both looked around my office. They took in the expensive modern art on the walls, the massive mahogany desk, and the panoramic view of the city. But they did not look at these things with pride for their daughter. They looked at my success with a deep, simmering resentment, acting as if I possessed things that rightfully belonged to their favorite child. "You have completely lost your mind," Patricia hissed, slamming her handbag onto one of my pristine leather guest chairs. "How dare you?" How dare you humiliate your sister in front of her future husband? I remained seated behind my desk, calmly folding my hands over the client paperwork. I did not humiliate Chloe, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Chloe attempted to extort me for $74,000 with a fabricated lawsuit. I simply declined her generous offer. Vernon stepped forward, pointing a trembling accusatory finger directly at my face. Do not use that corporate jargon with us, Maya. We are your parents. You sat in that restaurant and deliberately embarrassed Chloe in front of Preston and his legal team. Do you have any idea who the Sterling family is? Do you know what kind of elite connections they have? You jeopardized your sister's entire future over a petty disagreement about a wedding bill. You should be down on your knees thanking God that a family with that kind of incredible social standing is willing to welcome your sister into their circle. Patricia leaned heavily over my desk. Her eyes narrowed into angry, bitter slits. We just spent the entire morning doing damage control for your little stunt. Chloe was up all night crying hysterically in her apartment. Preston's lawyers completely dropped him, and now Preston is questioning whether our family is stable enough to marry into. You are going to fix this right now. You are going to pick up your phone, apologize to Preston, and you are going to write a check for the $74,000 to cover the remaining wedding vendors. You owe her this apology, and you owe this family your financial support. I looked at the two of them, genuinely marveling at the staggering depths of their delusion. I do not owe you or Chloe a single dime, I said, refusing to break eye contact. I am not funding a luxury wedding for a sister who just tried to steal a 15% ownership stake in my company. Patricia gasped loudly, pressing a hand to her chest in a heavily practiced display of maternal heartbreak. You selfish, ungrateful girl, she screamed, the volume of her voice echoing harshly off the glass walls of my office. You sit up here in this fancy building hoarding all your wealth, pretending you are so much better than the people who raised you. We sacrificed everything for you to be sitting in that chair. We spent our last dime putting you through that state college so you could get your degree. We skipped vacations, we went into debt. We gave you the foundation for this entire business. You owe everything you have to us, Maya. You owe your sister this wedding. I did not blink. I did not yell back. I had heard this exact speech 1,000 times throughout my entire life. It was their favorite weapon, the great towering myth of my parents' ultimate sacrifice. For 35 years, they had spun a relentless narrative where they were the hard-working, devoted parents who practically starved so I could succeed. They used this fake narrative to excuse why they never helped me with a down payment on my first apartment. They used it to excuse why they never bothered to attend my business launch. They used it to justify why every single spare dollar they ever earned was funneled directly into Chloe's bank account to fund her endless whims. I slowly pulled out the top drawer of my desk. I reached past my business cards and my customized stationery, my fingers closing around a thick, heavy, expanding file folder that I had kept meticulously updated for the better part of a decade. I pulled it out and slammed it down onto the center of my desk. The loud, heavy smack of the paper against the wood made both of my parents jump backward in surprise. I flipped open the flap and pulled out a thick stack of documents, deliberately spreading them out across the polished mahogany surface so they were completely impossible to ignore. What is this? Vernon asked, his aggressive posture slipping slightly as he looked at the official banking seals and university logos on the paperwork. These, I said, tapping the first stack of yellowing papers, are the official financial aid records from my state college. As you can clearly read, my tuition was covered entirely by academic scholarships and federal Pell Grants. And these, I said, pointing to the second thick stack of papers, are the loan origination documents and the monthly repayment receipts for the $30,000 in student loans I took out to cover my housing and food while I was studying. I paid every single monthly installment out of my own pocket, using the money I made waitressing graveyard shifts at a diner. I did not use your last dime. I did not use your first dime. You did not pay for a single textbook, a single meal, or a single credit hour of my education. Patricia stared at the receipts, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find a way to spin the undeniable proof lying right in front of her face. But I was not finished. I reached back into the expanding file and pulled out a separate, freshly printed stack of public records. And while we are talking about massive financial sacrifices, I continued, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal register. Let us talk about where your life savings actually went. 2 years ago, Chloe decided she wanted to be a high-end fashion entrepreneur. She opened a luxury boutique downtown. She signed a commercial lease she absolutely could not afford, ordered overseas inventory she could not sell, and ran the entire business straight into the ground in under 8 months. I pushed a printed public property record directly toward my father. You remortgaged your house to bail her out. You drained your retirement accounts to pay off her commercial landlord so she would not be sued for breach of contract. You completely funded her lavish lifestyle, her designer bags, and her luxury vacations while she was functionally unemployed. You bankrupted yourselves trying to buy Chloe a lifestyle she did not earn and could not sustain. So do not you dare walk into my office and tell me I owe this family my money because of your sacrifices. You sacrificed your own future to spoil a child who just tried to extort her own sister. The silence in my office was deafening. The air had been completely sucked out of the room. My mother stared down at the student loan receipts as if they were written in an alien language. My father looked pale, his eyes darting quickly away from the property record that proved his financial ruin was entirely his own doing. The great myth of their parental sacrifice had been shattered into pieces, and they had absolutely no defense left. For several long, agonizing seconds, the only sound in my office was the soft hum of the central air conditioning. Patricia stared down at the scattered documents, her eyes darting back and forth across the highlighted figures. The reality of her own financial ruin was staring right back at her, printed in undeniable black and white. I watched the exact moment her brain short-circuited. Instead of showing any remorse or admitting the truth, my mother did what toxic people always do when backed into a corner. She deflected. She violently shoved the property records away from her, her perfectly manicured hands shaking with rage. You went digging into our private financial business. She spat, her voice trembling with indignation. You violated our privacy to throw our struggles in our faces. You have always been a vicious, calculating girl, Maya. These are public county records, Mom. I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Anyone with a basic internet connection can see that you took out a massive second mortgage to fund Chloe's failed boutique. You chose to ruin your own retirement to play pretend in high society. Do not stand in my office and try to hand me the bill for your terrible parenting. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her chest again. We supported your sister because she actually needed us. You were always so cold and independent. You never asked for our help, so we gave it to the child who appreciated it. And this is how you repay us. By humiliating her in front of a prominent family like the Sterlings. Vernon finally stepped forward. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use the booming, authoritative voice he usually reserved for intimidating people at his local country club. He stepped right up to the edge of my desk, planting his fists heavily onto the polished mahogany. That is enough. Vernon commanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. I do not care what papers you managed to print out from the internet. You are going to listen to me, and you are going to listen to me right now. You are going to write a check for $74,000 to cover the rest of that wedding. You are going to call Preston Sterling, and you are going to beg for his forgiveness. If you refuse to do this, Maya, I will officially disown you. You will no longer be a part of this family. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. I looked up at my father, genuinely amused by his empty threats. Dad, I said softly, you disowned me the day I decided to stop giving my paycheck to my sister. You disowned me when you refused to attend my college graduation because Chloe had a minor cold. You disowned me when I started this crisis management firm, and you told your friends I was just a glorified secretary. Being disowned by you is not a threat, it is a relief. Vernon's eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. He realized the emotional manipulation was completely failing, so he immediately pivoted to the only other weapon he thought he possessed. If you do not write that check, Vernon growled, leaning closer to my face, I will ruin you in this city. I sit on 3 different community boards. I have friends in the local chamber of commerce. I will personally make sure every single prominent business owner in this state knows exactly what kind of deceitful, backstabbing woman you really are. I will tell them you steal from your own family. I will tell them your business is a fraud. We will go to Preston's family, and we will stand right beside them while their lawyers crush your little company into the dirt. We will make sure you lose everything you have built. I sat perfectly still, observing the man who was supposed to protect me actively, threatening to destroy my entire life's work over a wedding bill. It was a clarifying moment. Every last ounce of lingering guilt or familial obligation I might have carried completely evaporated. I felt nothing but a cold, surgical precision settling into my mind. I rested my elbows on the desk and looked my father dead in the eye. "Dad," I said, my tone dripping with absolute certainty. "My clients are sitting senators, international tech CEOs, and billionaire hedge fund managers. They come to me when their entire empires are burning to the ground and I put out the fires. They do not care about the gossip you spread at your Sunday golf games. They do not care about your community boards. You have absolutely no power in my world. Furthermore, the Sterling family is not going to crush my company because as of last night, their own legal team sprinted out of a restaurant just to get away from them." I reached out and pressed the silver button on my desk intercom. "Kira," I said clearly, "please send Marcus and David from security up to my office immediately. We have two unauthorized individuals who need an escort out of the building." Patricia let out a loud, dramatic shriek. "You are calling security on your own mother. You are having us thrown out." I stood up from my chair, smoothing the lines of my charcoal suit. "I am having trespassers removed from my corporate headquarters," I corrected her. "You came in here screaming, demanding money, and threatening my business. You are no longer acting as my parents. You are acting as hostile liabilities, and I handle liabilities the exact same way every single time. I remove them." The heavy glass door of my office swung open. Marcus and David, two broad-shouldered, highly trained security professionals, stepped into the room. They wore dark suits and earpieces, their expressions completely neutral, but undeniably commanding. "Ma'am," Sir Marcus said, gesturing toward the open door with a firm hand, "it is time to leave the premises. Please step this way." Vernon stood frozen, his face cycling through pure rage and profound humiliation. He had never been spoken to like this in his entire life. He was used to commanding respect, demanding obedience, and controlling the narrative. Now he was being publicly ejected from a high-rise office building like a common vagrant. "This is not over," Maya Vernon shouted, his voice shaking, as David took a step closer to him. "You are going to regret this. When the Sterlings are finished with you, you will be begging us for help." "I doubt that highly," I replied, turning my back on them to gather up the financial aid documents from my desk. "Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Mom. Do not ever return to this building." Patricia began sobbing loudly, hoping the performance would draw sympathy from my staff in the outer hallway. She clung to Vernon's arm as the two security guards firmly guided them out of my private suite. I listened as their footsteps echoed down the glass hallway, my mother's dramatic wailing fading as the heavy elevator doors finally slid shut. The silence that returned to my office was profound. I stood by my desk for a long moment, staring out at the city skyline. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The permanent boundary had been set. The toxic anchor I had dragged behind me for 35 years had finally been cut loose. I expected to feel sad, but I only felt lighter. A few moments later, the glass door to my office opened again, much softer this time. Jamal walked in. He had been working in the secure conference room down the hall, utilizing his specialized forensic software to dig through the encrypted files he had presented at the restaurant last night. He was holding his laptop in one hand and a freshly printed stack of documents in the other. His face was deadly serious. The warm, protective energy he usually carried had been entirely replaced by the sharp, analytical intensity of a man looking at a massive financial crime scene. "They are gone," Jamal asked, setting his laptop down on my desk. "Escorted out by security." I confirmed, walking around my desk to stand beside him. "They threatened to team up with Preston's family to destroy my business. They honestly believe the Sterlings are going to fund their wealthy lifestyle by association." Jamal let out a dark, humorless laugh. He opened the laptop and pulled up a complex spreadsheet filled with highlighted banking transactions, routing numbers, and corporate entity registrations. "Well, your parents are in for a very rude awakening," Jamal said, his voice low and urgent. "I spent the entire morning digging deeper into the data I pulled on Preston's family. The files I showed their lawyers last night were just the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to see exactly how deep the rot goes before we make our next move. What did you find? I asked, leaning in to look at the screen. Jamal pointed to a series of offshore accounts linked to a web of shell companies. Maya, the Sterling family real estate empire does not exist. It is a complete mirage. They haven't successfully developed a commercial property in nearly a decade. They are running a massive Ponzi scheme, moving money from new investors to pay off old debts and leveraging properties that are entirely underwater. They are completely broke, and federal investigators have quietly been circling them for months. I stared at the screen, processing the magnitude of his words. That explains why Preston is so desperate for a $74,000 wedding payout, I murmured. He doesn't have the cash to cover his own luxurious lifestyle anymore. He was trying to extort my company just to keep his head above water. It gets worse, Jamal said, his expression turning incredibly grim. He picked up the printed stack of documents and handed me the top page. It was a commercial loan application stamped with the logo of a major national bank. Look at the applicant details, Jamal instructed. I scanned the document. My blood ran completely cold. The applicant was not Preston. It was not the Sterling family enterprise. The applicant listed on the paperwork was my sister. They did not just try to extort you for wedding money, Jamal explained, tapping the paper. 2 weeks ago, the Sterlings used Chloe's name, her pristine credit history, and a fabricated business plan to secure a $2 million fraudulent loan. They funneled the cash directly into one of their offshore shell accounts to pay off a hostile investor. They are using your sister as a financial human shield. I stared at the commercial loan application on my desk, my eyes locked on the signature line. Chloe had actually signed it. My own sister, blinded by her desperate obsession with high society and marrying into a prominent white family, had willingly put her name on a $2 million fraudulent loan. She was legally bound to a massive federal crime, acting as the perfect disposable shield for a family of con artists. Jamal watched me process the information, his face a mask of quiet concern. I knew exactly what this meant. The Sterlings were not just going to ruin my sister financially, they were going to let her take the fall when the FBI finally raided their operation. I needed more information. I needed to see exactly how these people operated behind closed doors, and I needed to know if Chloe had any idea what she had actually signed. The perfect opportunity was only 3 days away. Preston's mother was hosting a lavish bridal shower for Chloe at the ultra-exclusive Pinecrest Country Club. I had originally planned to skip the event entirely, but now it was no longer just a party. It was a reconnaissance mission. When Saturday afternoon arrived, I pulled up to the sweeping circular driveway of the country club. The property was a monument to old money, featuring manicured golf courses, marble fountains, and a fleet of luxury cars idling near the valet stand. I stepped out of my vehicle wearing a sharply tailored emerald green sheath dress and nude heels. I looked successful, polished, and entirely out of place among the sea of pastel floral dresses and oversized sun hats worn by the Sterling family's elite social circle. I walked into the grand ballroom and was immediately hit by the scent of imported orchids and expensive perfume. The room was an obscene display of wealth that I now knew was completely fabricated. There were towering ice sculptures, a live string quartet, and waiters circulating with silver trays of vintage champagne. I scanned the room and quickly spotted Chloe. She was holding court in the center of the ballroom, laughing loudly and linking arms with Preston's mother. Preston's mother was a tall, thin white woman with severe features and a smile that never actually reached her eyes. She wore a string of pearls that looked heavy enough to choke someone, and she was currently introducing Chloe to a group of wealthy socialites as her lovely, if slightly unrefined, future daughter-in-law. Chloe spotted me standing near the entrance. Her fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she whispered something into the ear of Preston's mother. The older woman turned to look at me, her gaze sweeping over my dress with blatant disapproval. Then Chloe marched across the ballroom toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "I cannot believe you actually showed up," Chloe hissed, keeping her voice low so her new friends would not hear. "After you had Mom and Dad thrown out of your office like common criminals, I figured you would be too ashamed to show your face here." I smiled pleasantly, adjusting the strap of my clutch. I am here to support my only sister, Chloe. Besides, I wanted to see what a $74,000 wedding budget looks like before the checks start bouncing. Chloe's eyes flashed with pure venom. She leaned in close, the smell of her expensive perfume overpowering. You are not going to ruin this for me, Maya. You might think you are so powerful in your little downtown office, but you are nothing in this room. You do not belong with these people. She stepped back and raised her voice to a theatrical volume, ensuring the women standing near the gift table could hear every single word. Maya, I am so glad you could make it, Chloe announced brightly. I know country clubs are not really your scene, and I wanted to make sure you felt completely comfortable. Since your lifestyle is so much more modest than what the Sterling family is used to, I arranged a special seat just for you. She gestured dramatically toward the absolute back of the enormous ballroom. They're pressed tightly against the swinging wooden doors that led directly into the chaotic catering kitchen was a tiny wobbly cocktail table. It was separated from the main dining area by a large pillar completely isolating whoever sat there. A few members of the catering staff were actively using the table to fold extra linen napkins. A few of the wealthy guests chuckled softly behind their champagne flutes. Preston's mother watched from across the room, a look of profound satisfaction settling onto her sharp features. They expected me to throw a fit. They wanted me to cause a scene to demand a better seat to prove to this room full of elite strangers that I was exactly the loud, difficult, ungrateful sister they had claimed I was. I did not give them the satisfaction. I did not complain, and I did not flinch. Thank you, Chloe, I said gracefully. That spot looks incredibly peaceful. Enjoy your party. I walked across the entire length of the ballroom with my head held high, ignoring the whispers and the pitying glances. I reached the tiny table by the kitchen doors, politely smiled at the catering staff, and took my seat. The location was actually a tactical advantage. In my years of running a high-stakes crisis management firm, I learned that the back of the room is always the most valuable real estate at any high-profile event. The center of the room is for showing off. The back of the room is where people go when they need to make frantic phone calls, escape unwanted conversations, or manage sudden disasters. For the first hour, I sat quietly drinking sparkling water and observing the crowd. I watched Preston's mother parade Chloe around like a newly purchased pet, subtly insulting our family background, while Chloe just smiled and nodded, completely oblivious to the disrespect. But my patience was soon rewarded. A woman in a sharp navy suit hurried past the main dining tables and paced nervously near the kitchen doors. I recognized her immediately. It was Councilwoman Jenkins, a highly influential local politician who is currently the front-runner in the upcoming mayoral race. She looked incredibly stressed, her fingers flying across her smartphone screen as she muttered curses under her breath. She paced right past my tiny table, stopped, groaned in frustration, and leaned against the large pillar hiding me from the main room. I cannot just ignore the leaked photos, she hissed angrily into her phone. The press is going to run the story by 5 o'clock. If we issue a denial, it looks like a cover-up. If we apologize, it looks like an admission of guilt. I need a strategy that controls the narrative before the evening news cycle. She ended the call, running a stressed hand over her face. You do not deny and you do not apologize, I said quietly from my seat. Councilwoman Jenkins jumped, startled by my presence. She looked at me, taking in my tailored emerald dress and calm demeanor. Excuse me, she asked, her tone guarded. I stood up and approached her, keeping my voice low and confidential. If you are dealing with the zoning permit leak from this morning, a denial is fatal. You issue a proactive statement framing the leaked photos as an unauthorized preliminary draft of a project you personally ordered an audit on 3 weeks ago. You release the audit details simultaneously. You do not look guilty. You look like a strict leader uncovering bureaucratic incompetence. You kill the scandal by turning it into a demonstration of your oversight. She stared at me, her eyes widening as she rapidly processed the strategy. The panic in her posture completely vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a seasoned politician. That is brilliant, she whispered. That completely neutralizes the opposition's angle. Who are you? I reached into my clutch and handed her my heavy matte black business card. Maya Davis. I run a boutique crisis management firm downtown. We specialize in making highly complex problems disappear for people in your exact position. She looked at the card, then looked back at me with deep respect. I know this firm. You handled the massive data breach for the regional hospital network last year. You kept the CEO out of federal court. I simply smiled. Client confidentiality prevents me from confirming that, councilwoman, but I am glad my firm's reputation precedes me. She immediately pulled out her phone and typed in my contact information. I need you on retainer. Today. Hey, I will have my chief of staff wire the initial fee by 3 o'clock. You just saved my entire campaign. We shook hands firmly. As she turned to hurry back to the party, her entire demeanor transformed from panicked to powerful. I took my seat back at the tiny table by the kitchen doors, having just secured a six-figure consulting contract without breaking a single sweat. I looked up toward the center of the ballroom. Preston's mother was standing perfectly still holding a crystal champagne flute. She had watched the entire interaction. She had seen Councilwoman Jenkins, a woman who usually ignored the Sterling family's invitations, speaking to me with profound respect and gratitude. She saw the handshake. She saw the business card exchange. The look on the older woman's face was a mixture of absolute fury and deep primal panic. She had tried to humiliate me by seating me with the catering staff, and instead, I had turned her exclusive social event into my own personal boardroom. I had effortlessly commanded the attention of the most powerful person in the room, proving that true influence cannot be dictated by a seating chart. Preston's mother handed her champagne flute to a passing waiter with a sharp, aggressive movement. She glared directly at me, her eyes burning with a sudden, vicious hatred. She gave a quick, unmistakable jerk of her head toward the grand hallway that led to the private restrooms. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. She turned on her heel and marched out of the ballroom. I picked up my clutch, feeling the solid weight of my smartphone inside. I activated the voice recording application, secured the clasp, and stood up. It was time for a private chat. The hallway leading to the private powder room was lined with textured velvet wallpaper and antique silver mirrors that reflected the heavy crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. I walked at a very measured, deliberate pace, my heels sinking slightly into the thick imported carpet. I knew exactly what Preston's mother was trying to do. It was a classic, predictable intimidation tactic. You isolate the target, move them to a confined space where you control the environment, and you try to break them down without any witnesses present. I had seen desperate corporate executives use the exact same strategy during hostile mergers and board takeovers. It never worked on me then, and it certainly was not going to work on a desperate socialite clinging to a crumbling real estate empire. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the restroom. The space was absurdly luxurious, featuring a sitting area with plush pink velvet chaise lounges, marble vanity stations, and gold-plated fixtures that gleamed under the warm lighting. Preston's mother was standing by the furthest sink. She was pretending to adjust her expensive pearl necklace in the mirror, but I could clearly see the rigid tension in her narrow shoulders. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, completely sealing us off from the noise of the main ballroom, she whipped around to face me. The polite high society mask she had been wearing all afternoon had completely vanished. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed, taking an aggressive step toward me. Her voice was low, vibrating with a vicious anger that she usually kept carefully hidden behind her massive checkbook. "You come into my country club wearing that dress, acting like you belong here, and then you have the absolute audacity to solicit business at my future daughter-in-law's bridal shower. You are a classless, opportunistic girl who simply does not know her proper place in the world." I stood perfectly still near the door, keeping my posture relaxed and my hands loosely clasped in front of me. I made sure the sleeve of my emerald dress was pushed back just enough to give my smartwatch a clear, unobstructed audio path. "I did not solicit anything, Mrs. Sterling," I replied, keeping my tone exceptionally mild and unbothered. "The councilwoman approached me first. My firm has a well-known reputation for solving highly complex problems for people in power. I simply offered my professional assistance to a woman in a moment of need." Her face flushed a deep, mottled red at my calm dismissal. "You think you are so clever, do you not?" she sneered, closing the distance between us until she was standing only a few feet away. You think because you opened some little consulting agency downtown that you can walk into my world and disrespect my family. Your parents warned me about you. They told me you were a bitter, jealous woman who resented her sister's happiness. I thought they were exaggerating, but now I see exactly what they meant. You are just a greedy opportunist trying to steal the spotlight because you could never secure a prominent man like my son for yourself. I listened to her unhinged rant without a single flinch or outward reaction. For years, I had built my crisis management empire by mastering the exact art of dealing with people just like her. Wealthy, arrogant individuals who chronically underestimated me because of my background. As a self-made African American woman in a fiercely male-dominated corporate battlefield, I was constantly faced with executives who assumed I was either an assistant or simply a diversity hire to fill a quota. They would look at me, make snap judgments based on their own deep-seated prejudices, and drop their guard. They never saw the brilliant strategic mind operating behind my calm demeanor until their companies were already dismantled. Preston's mother was making the exact same fatal mistake right now. She looked at me and saw the scapegoat daughter of a middle-class family striving desperately for status. She saw someone she believed she could easily bully into submission using her country club membership and her historic family name. She had absolutely no idea that I spent my days dissecting the financial ruin of billionaires and navigating high-stakes federal investigations. I knew that the absolute best way to destroy an arrogant opponent was to hand them the shovel and let them dig their own grave. So I decided to play the exact role she desperately wanted me to play. I fed her massive ego. "Are you going to threaten my business again?" I asked intentionally, injecting a tiny, highly believable tremor of hesitation into my voice. "Because your lawyers already tried that at the restaurant and it clearly did not work. We both know you cannot successfully sue me for defamation just to get wedding money." She let out a harsh, mocking laugh, her eyes lighting up with the sick thrill of perceived victory. "Oh, you foolish, naive girl," she said, her voice dripping with absolute superiority. "You think because my lawyers walked out of a dinner that you actually won something. You think your little accountant husband scared us. We let you have that moment because it was easier than causing a public scene. But you have deeply offended me today, Maya. And the Sterling family does not tolerate disrespect from people like you." She began to pace back and forth in front of the marble vanities, gesturing wildly with her hands as she spoke. "You have no idea how much power I wield in this city. I sit on the board of every major philanthropic foundation. I control the exclusive guest lists of the most important galas. I personally know the bankers who hold the commercial lease on your downtown office space. If you do not write the check for Chloe's wedding by tomorrow morning, I will make one phone call, and your corporate rent will double overnight." She stopped pacing and glared at me. "I will tell Councilwoman Jenkins that you are a complete fraud and she will cancel your contract before the ink even dries. I will systematically destroy your reputation until you are begging for a job fetching coffee. You will have absolutely nothing left when I am finished with you." I widened my eyes, forcing myself to look slightly intimidated, stepping back until my shoulders touched the heavy wooden door. "But your family real estate business is struggling," I said softly, playing the desperate, misinformed card. "My husband saw your public financial records. You do not have the liquid capital to follow through on these massive threats. That is exactly why you are trying to force me to pay for the wedding." That was the exact trigger she needed to completely lose her grip on reality. The idea that someone from my background was questioning her immense wealth was entirely too much for her fragile, inflated ego to bear. She marched right up to me, jabbing her manicured index finger into the air just inches from my face, her composure shattering. "You know absolutely nothing about our wealth," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic, unhinged pride. "Your husband looked at our domestic public filings. Only a complete idiot keeps their true liquid assets sitting in an American commercial bank waiting to be taxed. We control millions of dollars that your pathetic husband could never even dream of finding. Our real money is heavily protected. We have a primary holding trust registered under the name Sterling Apex Holdings, based in the Cayman Islands." She leaned in closer, a triumphant, wicked smirk spreading across her face. "We just secured a massive influx of capital 2 weeks ago. We are untouchable, Maya. We are moving mountains of cash through accounts that federal regulators cannot even pronounce, let alone audit. So do not stand there and tell me I cannot crush you. I have more money sitting in my offshore Apex account right now than you will see in 10 lifetimes. You are nothing to me. I stared at her, keeping my expression perfectly arranged in a mask of shocked silence. Inside, my heart was racing with a fierce, cold victory. She had just handed me the holy grail of white-collar crime investigations. Jamal had spent days trying to trace the exact destination of the $2 million fraudulent loan they had taken out under Chloe's name. They had buried it under complex layers of shell companies, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint the final resting place without a federal subpoena. And now, driven entirely by her desperate need to prove her superiority, Preston's mother had just freely surrendered the exact name and location of the offshore account holding the stolen funds, Sterling Apex Holdings in the Cayman Islands. It was the missing puzzle piece. It was the absolute smoking gun we needed to destroy them. Preston's mother took a dramatic step back, clearly satisfied with my stunned silence. She smoothed down the front of her expensive dress, adjusting her pearl necklace one final time. She truly believed she had completely broken me. She thought she had put me permanently back in my place. You have until tomorrow morning to wire the $74,000 to my event coordinator, she stated coldly, her tone returning to its icy upper-class register. If the money is not in the account by 9 o'clock, I will start making the phone calls that will end your career. Do not test me again, Maya. You will not survive it. Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel, pushed past me, and pulled open the heavy wooden door. She marched back out into the grand hallway, her head held high, returning to the extravagant bridal shower to sip vintage champagne and accept compliments from her wealthy friends. She walked away feeling like a queen who had just conquered a rebellious subject. I stayed in the quiet luxury of the restroom for a long moment. I let the heavy door swing shut, plunging the space back into a pristine, undisturbed silence. I slowly lifted my left wrist, pulling back the emerald green fabric of my dress sleeve. I tapped the face of my smartwatch. The screen illuminated, displaying a bright red icon, indicating that the voice recording application was still actively running. I pressed the stop button and watched as the system automatically saved the audio file to my encrypted cloud server. I had a crystal-clear high-definition recording of Preston Sterling's mother, explicitly admitting to holding hidden assets, bragging about evading federal tax regulators, and confirming a massive recent influx of capital, perfectly matching the timeline of Chloe's fraudulent $2 million loan. She had threatened to systematically destroy my career. She had threatened to cancel my contracts and have my office lease revoked. But she was entirely unaware that in her arrogant, unhinged rant, she had just given me the exact ammunition I needed to send her entire family to federal prison. I took a deep breath, adjusted my clutch, and walked out of the restroom, ready to unleash absolute hell. I walked out of the exclusive Pinecrest Country Club, with the crisp afternoon breeze catching the edge of my emerald green dress. The valet brought my car around, and I slid into the driver's seat with a profound sense of clarity. I did not speed away. I drove back to the city at the exact legal limit, my mind operating with surgical precision. As soon as I arrived home, I synced my smartwatch to my encrypted home server. Jamal was sitting at our kitchen island, a cup of dark roast coffee in his hand, watching the audio file download onto his laptop screen, when he hit play and heard the unmistakable voice of Preston Sterling's mother, bragging about Sterling Apex Holdings and her Cayman Islands tax evasion. A slow, predatory smile spread across my husband's face. We had the smoking gun. Now all we had to do was wait for Preston to make his next desperate move. We did not have to wait long. Preston was arrogant, but he was also running out of time, and desperate men always make sloppy mistakes. The retaliation arrived at exactly 8 in the morning on Tuesday. I was sitting at my mahogany desk reviewing a media strategy for a new client when my private office line rang. It was not my assistant. It was my primary corporate banker, a man named Robert, who usually only called me to confirm large international wire transfers. His voice was incredibly tense, completely devoid of his usual cheerful professionalism. "Maya," he said, sounding genuinely distressed, "I need you to know that our legal compliance department just received a court order. We have been forced to temporarily freeze your primary business operating accounts. I felt a sharp, icy prickle at the base of my neck, but I kept my breathing perfectly even. On what grounds, Robert? An emergency ex parte injunction was filed an hour ago at the county courthouse, he explained, reading from a document on his end. The filing claims you systematically embezzled funds from the Sterling real estate enterprise under the guise of consulting fees. The plaintiff is Preston Sterling. He is claiming your firm is a front for corporate theft, and he convinced a judge to freeze your assets pending a full investigation to prevent flight risk. I hung up the phone and stared out the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my office. Preston was actually trying to financially suffocate me. It was a ruthless textbook bullying tactic. An ex parte injunction meant he had filed it secretly without giving me the opportunity to defend myself in front of the judge before the freeze went into effect. He knew perfectly well that I had never done a single day of consulting work for his fraudulent family business. The embezzlement claim was a complete fabrication, a massive lie designed to paralyze my firm's operations. He knew payroll was due at the end of the week. He knew that in the crisis management industry, the mere rumor of financial impropriety could cause clients to flee in droves. Preston expected me to panic. He expected me to look at my frozen bank accounts, realize I could not pay my staff or my office lease, and immediately call him begging for mercy. He wanted to back me into a corner where my only option for survival was to sign a quiet settlement agreement, hand over the $74,000 for his wedding and surrender 15% of my company just to make the fake lawsuit disappear. It was extortion wrapped in legal paperwork. A younger, less experienced version of myself might have crumbled under that kind of immense pressure. I leaned back in my chair and thought about the grueling years it took to build this agency. As an African American woman starting a business from scratch with absolutely zero family financial backing, I had to be twice as smart and 3 times as relentless as my wealthy, well-connected male counterparts. I remembered staying awake for 48 hours straight in a cramped studio apartment, surviving on black coffee and sheer willpower while drafting my very first corporate defense strategy. I remembered the venture capitalists who laughed in my face when I asked for a startup loan, forcing me to fund my own dream dollar by dollar. I built this empire with true grit, late nights, and an unwavering refusal to be a victim. Preston Sterling, a man who had never earned a single dollar that was not handed to him by a fraudulent trust fund, was not going to take it away from me. I did not panic, I went to war. I picked up my phone and dialed the personal cell number of Judge Harrison, a highly respected federal judge whose daughter I had quietly extracted from a massive media scandal 2 years ago without a single reporter ever finding out. I did not ask for a favor lightly, but when I explained that a frivolous retaliatory injunction had been slapped on my business accounts based on a fabricated claim, he was more than willing to intervene. Within 45 minutes, my high-level connections had bypassed the standard bureaucratic delays. The judge ordered an immediate mandatory emergency hearing for 1 o'clock that exact same afternoon to review the validity of Preston's claims. I called Jamal. He answered on the first ring. They froze the accounts, I said simply. Preston is claiming embezzlement. I could hear the sound of Jamal rapidly typing on his keyboard in the background. The emergency hearing is at 1, I continued. We are not just going to dissolve the injunction, Jamal. We are going to bury them. I will meet you at the courthouse, Jamal replied, his voice vibrating with absolute certainty. Wear the white suit. At 12:45, I stepped out of a black town car in front of the county courthouse. I was wearing a pristine white tailored suit that projected absolute authority and untouchable confidence. Jamal was waiting for me at the bottom of the grand stone steps. He looked magnificent in a dark gray suit, holding a thick combination-locked metal briefcase in his right hand. Inside that briefcase was a heavily encrypted tablet containing every single piece of forensic accounting data he had pulled on the Sterling family, the fraudulent $2 million loan documents bearing my sister's signature, and the high-definition audio recording of Preston's mother, explicitly detailing her offshore tax evasion schemes. We did not say a word to each other as we walked up the wide stone steps. We moved in perfect synchronicity, a unified front of absolute destruction. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung open, and we navigated the bustling security checkpoint with the ease of people who knew exactly where they were going and exactly what they were about to do. We rode the elevator up to the fourth floor civil litigation wing. As the metal doors slid open, I immediately spotted them at the far end of the marble hallway. Preston and Chloe were standing outside courtroom 4B. Preston was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smug, victorious grin that made my blood boil. Chloe was standing next to him, wearing an expensive designer trench coat and holding a luxury coffee cup. She was actually smiling, looking completely thrilled at the prospect of watching my life's work burn to the ground. They had brought a new lawyer with them, a nervous-looking man who was frantically reviewing a stack of papers. Clearly, after the elite legal team abandoned them at the restaurant, Preston had been forced to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find an attorney willing to file this fraudulent injunction. Preston caught sight of me walking down the hallway. His smirk widened, and he uncrossed his arms, stepping forward to block our path to the courtroom doors. Well, 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 Preston taunted, his voice echoing loudly off the marble walls. I honestly did not expect you to show up, Maya. I figured you would be too busy packing up your office in cardboard boxes. It is a shame about your frozen bank accounts. I hear missing payroll is a guaranteed way to ruin a business permanently. Chloe took a sip of her coffee and laughed softly. You should have just paid for the wedding when I asked nicely, Maya. Now you are going to lose everything because you are too stubborn to learn your place. You brought this entirely on yourself. Do not expect Mom and Dad to help you when you are bankrupt. I stopped walking, positioning myself just 2 feet away from Preston. I looked at his expensive shoes, his tailored suit, and the arrogant tilt of his chin. I looked at my sister, who had willingly signed her name to a massive federal crime just to buy her way into this illusion of wealth. They truly believed they had me trapped. They believed their aggressive legal bullying had desperate surrender. I did not raise my voice. I did not show anger. I simply smiled, looking directly into Preston's eyes. You made a very serious mistake today, Preston, I said, my voice perfectly calm and laced with lethal promise. You brought a fake lawsuit to a real fight. Preston scoffed, shaking his head. You have no money, Maya. You cannot fight me. Jamal stepped forward, gripping the handle of the metal briefcase tightly. He looked at Preston with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. We do not need money to fight you, Sterling, Jamal stated coldly. We just need the truth, and we brought plenty of it. Without waiting for Preston to respond, Jamal and I bypassed them completely. I reached out, grasped the heavy brass handle of the courtroom doors, and pushed them open. We walked into the quiet, imposing room, fully armed and ready to flip the legal pressure entirely back onto the people who thought they could destroy me. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B swung shut behind us with a resounding thud, sealing us inside a theater of polished mahogany and absolute judicial authority. The environment was intentionally sterile and imposing, designed to strip away arrogance and demand the truth. Preston, Sterling, and my sister Chloe were already seated at the plaintiff table. Their new, visibly perspiring attorney was frantically shuffling a meager stack of papers, his hands trembling slightly under the severe, unblinking gaze of Judge Harrison. The judge sat high on the bench, his expression an unreadable mask of federal authority. I knew from prior experience that Judge Harrison possessed absolutely no patience for corporate frivolity in his courtroom. Preston leaned back in his heavy wooden chair, projecting a completely unearned air of wounded nobility. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and smirked at me across the aisle, clearly believing he held my entire future in the palm of his hand. Chloe sat right beside him, wearing a designer trench coat and a smug, victorious grin. Her eyes gleamed with the toxic anticipation of watching my life's work burn to the ground. She truly thought she was about to become wealthy by dismantling the sister she had always resented. Judge Harrison banged his gavel once, the sharp crack echoing through the cavernous room. The emergency hearing commenced. Preston's lawyer cleared his throat, attempting to project a confidence he clearly lacked, and launched into his fabricated narrative. He stood before the court and falsely claimed that I had systematically siphoned capital from the Sterling real estate enterprise, funneling massive sums through my boutique crisis management firm under the guise of exorbitant consulting fees. He painted a highly detailed, entirely fictional picture of me as a desperate, deceitful opportunist, draining a historic old money family of their rightful wealth. He concluded his baseless tirade by demanding that my business accounts remain permanently frozen to prevent flight risk, attempting to suffocate my agency before the end of the financial quarter. When the lawyer finally sat down, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Harrison turned his piercing gaze toward our defense table, waiting for a response. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of panic. I simply looked at my husband. Jamal rose fluidly from his chair. He lifted his heavy combination-locked metal briefcase and placed it deliberately onto the polished oak table. The loud metallic snap of the lock springing open echoed sharply across the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. Your Honor. Jamal began, his voice carrying the deep, resonant authority of a man who held the absolute, indisputable truth. We are not here today to defend against a corporate embezzlement claim, because the plaintiff does not actually possess any corporate funds to embezzle. What we are looking at is a malicious retaliatory injunction filed by a desperate family attempting to extort my wife to cover their collapsing personal debts. And we brought the forensic evidence to prove it. Jamal reached into the open briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver audio playback device. He placed it deliberately on the evidence stand, keeping his eyes locked on the judge. 2 days ago, the plaintiff's mother cornered my wife in a private restroom during a social event. She explicitly threatened to systematically destroy my wife's business unless an extortion payment of $74,000 was made immediately. During that unhinged threat, she detailed the true nature of the Sterling family finances. I ask the court's permission to submit this legally obtained single-party consent recording into the official record. Judge Harrison nodded firmly, his judicial interest clearly piqued. Proceed, the judge ordered. Jamal pressed the play button. The pristine acoustics of the courtroom amplified the arrogant, vicious voice of Preston's mother. Her words filled the silent space, bragging about evading federal tax regulators, detailing a massive recent influx of stolen capital, and explicitly naming the exact offshore holding trust located in the Cayman Islands. She boasted about being completely untouchable and moving mountains of cash through hidden accounts that federal regulators could not even pronounce. The color drained entirely from Preston's face in a matter of seconds. His smug, victorious grin was completely wiped away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. Chloe stopped smiling. She looked around the courtroom wildly, her eyes darting between her fiancé, the judge, and the exit doors. She was slowly realizing that the illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage was dissolving into thin air right in front of her. Their nervous lawyer physically shrank back into his leather chair, scooting away from his own clients as the sheer magnitude of the criminal liability unfolding before him became horrifyingly apparent. Jamal did not give them a single second to recover. As the audio finished playing, he pulled a thick, tightly bound stack of financial documents from the metal briefcase and handed them directly to the court clerk. Your Honor. Jamal continued his tone, clinical, surgical, and absolutely devastating. That audio recording references a specific offshore account named Sterling Apex Holdings. The forensic accounting documents I just submitted contain the international routing numbers, the corporate shell entity registrations, and the heavily encrypted transfer logs confirming that exact account's existence. The Sterling family real estate empire has not successfully developed a commercial property in over a decade. They are actively operating a massive Ponzi scheme, defrauding domestic investors to pay off international debts. Jamal reached back into the briefcase and pulled out one final, highly crucial document, holding it up for the judge to see clearly. Furthermore, Your Honor, the sudden influx of capital the plaintiff's mother bragged about on that recording did not come from a legitimate investor. It came from a $2 million commercial loan fraudulently obtained just 2 weeks ago. The Sterling secured this massive loan using fabricated business plans and funneled the cash directly into their offshore accounts to hide it from domestic creditors. They filed this frivolous injunction against my wife today to paralyze her firm and force a fast cash settlement to cover their immediate collapsing wedding debts. Judge Harrison scrutinized the financial documents for several long, agonizing minutes. The silence in the room was absolute heavy with the crushing weight of impending doom for the Sterling family. Finally, the judge looked up, his eyes burning with righteous judicial fury. He slammed his wooden gavel down with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot. The emergency injunction against your business accounts is dismissed immediately, the judge stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He turned a lethal, uncompromising glare toward Preston and his trembling attorney. Filing a frivolous injunction based on completely fabricated claims to further an extortion attempt is a severe abuse of this court and a direct violation of the law. But we were not finished. We did not just come to this courthouse to defend my business, we came to trap them permanently. I stood up, smoothing the front of my white tailored suit, and addressed the court with unwavering confidence. Your Honor, I said clearly, ensuring every word was perfectly recorded by the court stenographer. Given the overwhelming evidence of financial crimes, corporate extortion, and the explicit threats made against my company, we are counterfiling right here, right now. We are formally submitting all of this forensic evidence, the audio recordings, the offshore routing numbers, and the fraudulent loan applications, into the permanent public court record. Preston let out a choked, desperate sound, his hands flying to his head. He knew exactly what I was doing. Submitting those documents into the public record meant they were no longer a private family dispute. The moment they entered the court system, they became entirely accessible to federal prosecutors, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. We were handing the federal government a perfectly wrapped, fully investigated criminal case on a silver platter. The trap had slammed shut, and the Sterlings were completely caught in their own legal snare. Judge Harrison nodded firmly, validating my strategic maneuver. The evidence is accepted into the public record. I am also forwarding these transcripts directly to the district attorney's office for immediate review regarding potential perjury and fraud committed in my courtroom today. We are adjourned. Preston practically bolted from his chair. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and dragged her out of the courtroom as fast as their legs could carry them, shoving past the heavy wooden doors in a blind panic. Their lawyer was already on, having completely abandoned his legal files on the table, in his desperate haste to escape any association with a massive federal crime. I let out a slow, steady breath, feeling the tremendous weight of the morning finally lift from my shoulders. My business was entirely safe. My corporate accounts were unfrozen. The payroll would go out on time. And the people who had maliciously tried to destroy me were walking straight into a federal prison sentence. I had protected the empire I built from nothing, and I had done it without compromising a single ounce of my integrity. I turned to Jamal, a genuine relieved smile breaking across my face. He was standing by the defense table, packing his metal briefcase efficiently, organizing the remaining copies of the complex financial documents. But as he picked up the original copy of the $2 million commercial loan application, his movement suddenly stopped completely. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked intensely on the bottom of the page. The victorious, triumphant atmosphere surrounding us instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, heavy, suffocating dread. Jamal looked up at me, his expression more grave and devastated than I had ever seen it in all our years of marriage. He took a slow step closer to me, lowering his voice to a bare, urgent whisper, so the remaining court clerks packing up their stations would not hear him. Maya, Jamal said, pointing a steady, uncompromising finger directly at the signature line on the fraudulent commercial loan document. I need you to look at this very carefully. I leaned in, fully expecting to see the clumsy, desperate forgery we had assumed Preston used to secure the stolen funds. I expected to see a tracing of my sister's handwriting, an amateur attempt to use her pristine credit history without her knowledge. But as I looked at the dark ink on the stark white paper, my heart completely dropped into my stomach. The strokes of the pen were fluid, confident, and undeniably familiar. It was a signature I had seen on childhood birthday cards, shared apartment leases, and countless family notes for my entire life. There was no hesitation in the cursive loops, no jagged edges indicating a traced forgery. It was a perfect, willing authorization. "This is not a forgery," Jamal whispered, his voice dark, with a terrible, inescapable realization. Chloe signed these fraudulent documents willingly. She is going down with them. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Beaumont Estate, a historic mansion situated in the most exclusive zip code in the city. It catered exclusively to old money and high society, a place where the valet parked imported sports cars and waitstaff wore white gloves. As Jamal and I walked through the towering mahogany doors, we were hit by the overwhelming scent of imported white roses and the sophisticated sound of a live string quartet playing in the corner of the grand ballroom. The entire event was a flawless, glittering illusion of immense prosperity. Every crystal chandelier, every bottle of vintage champagne, and every hors d'oeuvre passed on silver trays was paid for entirely by defrauded investors and stolen capital. The Sterling family was putting on a magnificent theatrical performance, masking the fact that their entire real estate empire was currently collapsing under a massive federal investigation. I was not there to celebrate. I was there on a rescue mission. I wore a tailored black evening gown, my demeanor strictly professional and deeply guarded. Jamal stood close by my side, a grounding force in a room full of people actively operating a criminal enterprise. Despite the malicious extortion attempt at the restaurant and a lifetime of cruel, unrelenting entitlement, Chloe was still my blood. I knew with absolute certainty that the federal government was already preparing the indictments. I knew authorities had been diligently tracking the offshore routing numbers and encrypted bank transfers Jamal had handed over. The legal trap we had set was closing rapidly. Tonight was the very last chance Chloe had to walk away before she was permanently chained to a federal racketeering charge. I needed to give her one final off-ramp. I scanned the glittering ballroom and quickly spotted my sister. Chloe held court near a towering champagne pyramid, wearing a custom white silk cocktail dress that undoubtedly cost more than a reliable car. She laughed loudly, soaking up the desperate attention of Preston's elitist relatives. My parents, Vernon and Patricia, stood just a few feet away, beaming with manufactured pride as they desperately tried to network with people who secretly viewed them as completely disposable. I caught Chloe's eye from across the room. I gave her a slight, urgent nod, gesturing toward the arched, dimly lit corridor that led to the private lounge areas. Her bright, artificial smile faltered. She rolled her eyes, but her natural curiosity and sheer arrogance won out. She whispered something to Preston, excused herself from the wealthy socialites, and followed me. The private hallway was heavily carpeted and silent, shielded from the party by soundproofed oak doors. I stopped near a large bay window overlooking the estate gardens and faced her. I took a deep, steadying breath. In my professional life, I charged exorbitant corporate retainers to navigate people out of disastrous situations. Right now, I was offering my highest-tier crisis management services to my sister for absolutely free. "What do you want?" Chloe snapped, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her tone was sharp and defensive, instantly reverting to the spoiled, petulant child our parents had created. "If you are here to cause a scene or lecture me about the wedding budget again, you can turn right around and leave. Preston and I are not dealing with your toxic energy tonight." I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to take the emotional bait. "I am here to save your life, Chloe. Listen to me very carefully. Preston's family is completely bankrupt. They are running a massive Ponzi scheme, moving stolen cash through international shell companies. They used your signature and your clean credit history to secure a $2 million fraudulent loan. They are using you as a financial human shield, and federal authorities are watching them." I expected her to show shock. I expected her to deny it, to look terrified, or to demand proof. I expected the natural reaction of a woman discovering she was marrying into a crime syndicate. Instead, Chloe let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. She looked at me with an expression of pure disdain. "Is that really the best you could come up with, Maya?" Chloe sneered, stepping closer. "Creative financing, that is how the real estate world works. Preston explained the entire process to me weeks ago. You move capital around to leverage assets and secure new investments. It is completely normal for high net worth individuals to use various business entities to manage wealth. You are just trying to scare me because you do not understand how real money operates." I stared at her, feeling a heavy knot form in the pit of my stomach. She admitted it. She knew she had signed the commercial loan documents. She had willingly tethered herself to a massive financial crime simply because a white man in a tailored suit used the word leverage to make her feel important. It is not creative financing. Chloe, I urged, stepping right into her space, letting genuine desperation bleed into my voice. It is federal wire fraud. It is massive corporate embezzlement. Preston's mother explicitly admitted on a recording that they are hiding money in the Cayman Islands to evade federal tax regulators. If you walk down that aisle tomorrow, you are legally binding yourself to a criminal enterprise. You will go to federal prison. Walk away right now. Jamal and I will put you in a car tonight. We will get you the best white-collar defense attorney in the state, and we will protect you from the fallout. I am begging you to let me help you. Chloe's face twisted into an ugly, bitter sneer. The lifetime of toxic conditioning our parents had instilled in her completely took over. She did not see a sister trying to save her. She saw a rival trying to steal her crown. Protect me. Chloe spat, jabbing a manicured index finger hard against my collarbone. You just want to control me. You have always been insanely jealous of me, Maya. Mom and Dad warned me you would try to sabotage my happiness the moment I got engaged. They told me you could not handle the fact that I am marrying into a prominent, powerful family, while you had to claw your way up from the absolute bottom. She took a step back, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. You are just an exhausted woman who spends her whole life putting out corporate fires because you have no class. You sit in your downtown office thinking you are superior because you work hard, but you will never have the kind of social standing the Sterling family has. Preston is giving me a life you could never achieve. I am about to be a Sterling. I am about to be completely untouchable. You are just mad your intimidation tactics at the courthouse did not work. I stood perfectly still, letting her vicious words wash over me. The final fragile thread of familial obligation I had been holding on to completely snapped. I looked at my sister and realized there was nothing left to save. She was not a victim of the Sterling family. She was an eager participant in their delusion. She craved the fake status so deeply that she was willing to trade her own freedom for a stolen wedding. I had offered her the ultimate exit strategy, and she had violently thrown it back in my face. I am not jealous of you, Chloe, I said softly, my voice devoid of any remaining warmth. I am just warning you. Actions have consequences. Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out another arrogant laugh. Watch me win, Maya. She spun around on her expensive designer heels and marched directly back down the corridor toward the grand ballroom. I followed slowly behind her, watching as my sister walked willingly back into the very illusion that was about to destroy her entire life. She stormed straight past the glowing champagne pyramid, ignoring the curious glances of the wealthy guests. She walked directly to the center of the main dining room with an air of aggressive, unearned authority. She grabbed a silver spoon from the tray of a passing waiter and marched right up to the microphone stand, set up for the evening's speeches. She turned locked eyes with me from across the massive room and tapped her crystal glass loudly. The sharp, piercing sound immediately silenced the entire room, demanding everyone's absolute attention for a toast. The sharp, piercing sound of silver striking crystal cut through the low murmur of the grand ballroom. Chloe stood in the dead center of the room, the microphone gripped tightly in her hand, a triumphant and vicious smile plastered across her face. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Hundreds of wealthy guests, all dressed in their finest evening wear, turned their attention toward the glowing bride-to-be. I stood perfectly still near the grand archway, half concealed by the heavy velvet drapes. Jamal stepped up right beside me, his presence a solid, immovable wall of support. We watched as my sister prepared to deliver her final fatal performance. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Chloe began, her voice echoing through the expensive sound system. Her tone was artificially sweet, dripping with a manufactured innocence that made my stomach turn. Looking around this beautiful room, seeing all of Preston's incredible friends and family, I am just overwhelmed with gratitude. A polite murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Preston stood beside her, beaming with that same arrogant, unearned pride he always carried. He wrapped his arm around her waist, playing the part of the wealthy protector. You know, Chloe continued, her voice taking on a sudden theatrical quiver. Getting to this moment has not been easy for me. I have had to overcome a lot of obstacles and a lot of negativity. When you find true happiness, there are always people who want to tear you down because they are bitter about their own lives. She paused, letting the silence stretch for dramatic effect. Her eyes scanned the room and locked directly onto mine. The guests following her gaze turned to look at me standing in the shadows. I am talking about my sister Maya, Chloe announced into the microphone. A collective uncomfortable gasp echoed through the ballroom. People shifted awkwardly in their seats, exchanging shocked whispers. You do not usually air family grievances at a rehearsal dinner, but Chloe was far too consumed by her own spite to care about social etiquette. She wanted blood. Maya runs a failing little crisis agency downtown. Chloe lied effortlessly, her voice dripping with condescending pity. She has spent her entire life being jealous of me. She is toxic, she is broke, and she has spent the last few weeks desperately trying to sabotage my wedding because she cannot stand to see me succeed. She even tried to extort Preston and me for money just to keep her own miserable business afloat. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was taking the exact crime she and the Sterlings had committed against me and projecting it entirely onto my shoulders. She was using a microphone to publicly assassinate my character in front of the city's elite. But I am standing here tonight to say that love conquers all. Chloe proclaimed, raising her champagne glass high into the air. She turned to Preston, gazing up at him like he was a savior. I want to thank my incredible fiancé. Preston, you saved me from a toxic, broken family dynamic. You rescued me from a sister who only wanted to drag me down to her level. You showed me what real wealth, real class, and real love actually look like. Preston leaned in and kissed her, and the room erupted into applause. It was a sickening display of mass delusion. They were cheering for a man who was actively running a massive federal Ponzi scheme, and a woman who had willingly signed a $2 million fraudulent loan just to buy her way into this room. They were toasting to a financial mirage that was about to collapse on top of all of them. But the ultimate betrayal was not finished. As the applause died down, my father Vernon stepped up to the microphone. My mother Patricia walked proudly right beside him. They took their places next to Chloe and Preston, forming a united front of absolute treachery. Vernon cleared his throat, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. I would like to add a few words, my father said, his booming voice echoing across the tables. Patricia and I have worked our entire lives to provide the best for our children. We tried to instill good values, hard work, and integrity. Unfortunately, as Chloe said, you cannot save someone who refuses to be saved. He did not look at me. He looked out at the wealthy audience, desperate to secure their approval. Maya has made her choices, Vernon continued. She has chosen a path of bitterness and deceit. We have tried to guide her, but we must protect our own peace. We cannot allow her hostility to tarnish this beautiful celebration. Patricia leaned into the microphone, her voice shaking with fake maternal sorrow. It breaks a mother's heart to say this, she declared loudly. But we must be honest. Chloe is the only daughter who truly listened to us. She is the only one who understands the meaning of family and loyalty. Preston, your family has been so gracious, so generous, and so incredibly successful. We are honored to merge our family with yours. Vernon took the microphone back for the final devastating blow. Chloe, he said, his voice swelling with manufactured emotion. You are our only true pride and joy. You have brought nothing but light and prestige to this family. We raise our glasses to you and Preston, to a brilliant, wealthy, and unstoppable future. The entire ballroom stood up. Hundreds of guests raised their crystal flutes in unison. The string quartet struck up a joyful, triumphant chord. I stood in the shadows watching my own parents publicly disown me to impress a room full of strangers. I watched them eagerly sacrifice my reputation just to secure their proximity to a wealth that did not actually exist. For 35 years, I had carried the heavy, suffocating burden of trying to understand them. I had spent my entire life wondering what I was doing wrong, wondering why my achievements were never enough, wondering why my sister's failures were rewarded while my successes were punished. In that exact moment, the burden completely vanished. I felt a profound, absolute clarity wash over my entire body. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I did not feel the sting of rejection. I felt nothing but a cold, surgical liberation. My family was completely unsalvageable. They were hollow, toxic people who would gladly throw me to the wolves if it meant they got to wear a nicer coat. They had chosen their path. They had chosen their fake society, their fraudulent wealth, and their criminal allies. They had tied themselves to a sinking ship, and they were celebrating the anchor that was about to pull them under. Jamal stepped slightly in front of me, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes burning with a protective, lethal fury. He was ready to walk right into the center of that room and tear the microphone from my father's hands. He was ready to publicly dismantle every single lie they had just spoken. I reached out and placed my hand gently on his arm. I shook my head. "We do not interrupt them," I whispered calmly. "We let them enjoy their final night of freedom." I reached over to a nearby serving tray and picked up a single glass of champagne. I held it loosely in my fingers. I stepped out from the shadows of the velvet drapes, stepping into the edge of the light where my family could clearly see me. Chloe spotted me immediately. Her triumphant smile widened. She thought she had broken me. She thought her public humiliation had finally destroyed my spirit. Vernon and Patricia looked at me with cold, dismissive glares, daring me to cause a scene. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. I looked at my parents, and I raised my glass. I raised it high, offering them a silent, perfectly composed toast. I toasted to their arrogance. I toasted to their profound ignorance. I toasted to the absolute ruin that was speeding toward them like a freight train in the dark. Chloe's smile faltered slightly. The sheer lack of emotion on my face clearly unsettled her. She expected a reaction. She expected me to crumble. My absolute serenity unnerved her more than a screaming match ever could. I lowered my glass, placed it back onto the silver tray, without taking a single sip, and turned my back on my family for the very last time. Jamal placed his hand on the small of my back, and we walked out of the grand ballroom together. We moved with the steady, measured pace of predators, leaving a trap they had already sprung. We walked down the heavily carpeted corridor, leaving the sounds of the string quartet and the clinking glasses far behind us. The corridor led into the estate's private bar area, a quiet, dimly lit room reserved for VIP guests seeking a moment away from the main event. It was nearly empty, save for a few bartenders polishing glasses and a single man sitting quietly at the far end of the mahogany counter. The man was wearing a sharp, dark suit. He had a glass of club soda in front of him, and he was casually reading a newspaper. But his posture was alert, highly trained, and entirely focused on the entrance. As Jamal and I walked through the bar area, heading toward the main exit doors, the man slowly lowered his newspaper. He looked up, his sharp eyes cutting through the dim lighting. He was not a wedding guest. He was not a friend of the Sterling family. He was Jamal's contact. He was the lead investigator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. I did not stop walking, but I locked eyes with him as we passed. The investigator looked at me, then looked at Jamal. He gave one single, subtle, barely perceptible nod. It was the confirmation we had been waiting for. The warrants had been signed. The federal task force was fully assembled and ready. The financial routing numbers had been verified, and the offshore accounts had been successfully frozen. The trap was officially set, and there was absolutely no way out. I pushed open the heavy front doors of the Beaumont estate and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. Tomorrow morning, my sister was going to put on a white dress and walk down an aisle. And when she did, she was going to walk straight into the arms of the federal government. The morning sun rose over the city, casting a brilliant, warm light across our bedroom. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee, feeling a profound sense of calm that I had not experienced in decades. Jamal was already awake and fully dressed. He was sitting at his multi-monitor command center in our home office, his fingers moving methodically across his keyboard as he monitored the digital traps we had set the night before. Today was the day. Today, my younger sister Chloe was scheduled to put on a custom silk dress and walk down the aisle of the Grand Cathedral. She was expecting to marry Preston Sterling in front of the city's most elite residents, securing her place in high society. But behind the closed, heavy oak doors of their luxurious bridal suite, The fairy tale was already turning into an absolute inescapable nightmare. Down at the historic cathedral and the adjoining reception hall, the Sterling family illusion was violently and catastrophically unraveling. We had coordinated with federal authorities to freeze their offshore Cayman accounts late last night. By 8 o'clock this morning, the devastating financial shockwave finally hit the mainland. Preston's family credit cards began declining across the board. Every single transaction, from the premium vintage champagne delivery to the luxury limousine rentals, was met with a harsh, undeniable rejection code from the processing banks. The heavy black cards they flashed around town, like badges of honor, were suddenly nothing more than worthless pieces of plastic. The wealthy facade was evaporating into thin air. The venue manager, a notoriously strict professional who catered only to guaranteed wealth, quickly caught wind of the bouncing payments. He did not care about the Sterling family name or their supposed historic legacy in the real estate market. He cared about his bottom line. He immediately halted all event preparations. He marched upstairs and cornered Preston and his mother in the bridal suite lobby, flanked by the lead florist and the executive catering director. The ultimatum he delivered was swift and entirely merciless. Unless the remaining $74,000 balance was paid in full via cash, or a direct cleared wire transfer within the hour, the entire wedding would be permanently canceled. The tension in that lobby must have been suffocating. The florists, unpaid and angry, threatened to march right into the Grand Cathedral and physically dismantle the towering white orchid arrangements they had spent all night building. The caterers promised to load the imported caviar, the Wagyu beef, and the towering 5-tier wedding cake straight back into their refrigerated trucks. The venue manager made it explicitly clear that he would personally lock the heavy mahogany cathedral doors and send the wealthy guests home the absolute moment they arrived. The Sterlings were facing complete unmitigated public humiliation. At 9:30 sharp, my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. I placed my coffee mug on the cool granite kitchen counter and accepted the call, pressing the speaker button so Jamal could hear every single word from his desk in the office. Chloe was completely hysterical. She was screaming so loudly that her voice broke into sharp, jagged sobs. I could easily picture her standing in her bridal suite, wearing her expensive custom wedding dress, with her makeup running down her face, watching her perfect, carefully manufactured day disintegrate into a humiliating disaster. "Maya, you have to fix this right now," Chloe shrieked, her breathing ragged and heavy with pure panic. "Preston's bank accounts are glitching. There is some kind of stupid security hold on his family trust, and the venue manager is threatening to kick us all out into the street. The florists are literally taking the centerpieces out of the main dining room. You need to wire the $74,000 to the venue immediately." She did not ask for a favor. She demanded compliance. Even as her entire world collapsed around her, the deep-seated entitlement our parents, Vernon and Patricia, had carefully cultivated over 30 years remained fully intact. I stood there in my kitchen listening to her blame absolutely everyone but herself. She was acting as if my money was simply a reserve fund that she was naturally entitled to access whenever her own terrible decisions caught up with her. "This is entirely your fault, Maya," Chloe cried, her voice echoing harshly through my quiet home. "You stressed Preston out so much with your ridiculous courthouse stunt yesterday that he forgot to authorize the final vendor transfers. You made his mother sick with worry. If you do not send the money right now, my wedding is completely ruined, and I will never forgive you. Mom and Dad are panicking, and they said you need to stop being selfish and save this family." I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single ounce of sisterly sympathy. I simply leaned closer to the phone, letting a cold, absolute finality settle into my words. "I warned you last night, Chloe." I said, my tone as hard and unyielding as concrete. "I pulled you aside. I gave you the absolute truth about the Sterling family. I told you they were running a fraudulent empire, and you laughed directly in my face. You chose to grab a microphone and mock my business in front of a room full of fake friends. You chose to celebrate a man who used your signature to commit a massive federal crime. I am not funding a criminal enterprise, and I am certainly not paying the bill for your willful ignorance. You made your bed with the Sterlings. Now you can deal with the consequences of your own actions." Without waiting for her to formulate another hysterical excuse, I pressed the red button on my screen and disconnected the call. I tossed the phone onto the counter and walked into the home office standing right behind Jamal's chair. Back at the wedding venue, panic had completely consumed Preston Sterling. The arrogant, wealthy heir was finally backed into a corner he could not buy his way out of. He had a cathedral full of high society guests, arriving in less than 2 hours. A hysterical bride throwing a tantrum in the bridal suite, and angry vendors threatening immediate public humiliation. He was a man who had never faced a single real consequence in his entire life, and he was absolutely desperate to keep his fraudulent illusion intact. He needed capital and he needed it instantly. Preston quickly realized he could not access his frozen offshore accounts. He could not rely on his parents, whose domestic assets were equally paralyzed by the federal freeze we had initiated. He needed an unguarded, highly funded account to drain, and he thought he knew exactly where to find one. Years ago, when I first launched my crisis management firm, I temporarily used our parents' house as a mailing address to receive some early corporate documents before securing a dedicated business office downtown. I had noticed that a few sensitive banking documents had gone missing during that time. When I confronted my parents about it, Vernon and Patricia aggressively dismissed my concerns, claiming the Postal Service simply lost them and telling me I was being paranoid. In reality, Chloe had stolen them. She had secretly opened my sealed mail, copied down my personal and business routing numbers, and kept them hidden. She always believed that my wealth was a family resource she could quietly tap into if she ever truly needed a bailout. She had proudly handed those stolen banking details over to Preston weeks ago, bragging to him about how much liquid capital her estranged successful sister actually possessed. They had kept my banking information as a backup plan, a secret reserve they fully intended to exploit. Now, standing in a panicked sweat in the cathedral hallway, Preston pulled out his encrypted laptop. Driven entirely by his arrogant belief that he would never be caught, he bypassed standard banking protocols. He initiated a massive, unauthorized wire transfer, attempting to pull the required $74,000 directly out of my primary business operating account to pay off the furious venue manager. He assumed I would not notice the missing funds until after the wedding was over. By then, he planned to be safely out of the country on a lavish international honeymoon, leaving me to deal with the messy banking dispute while he enjoyed the benefits of my stolen money. But Preston was not dealing with a standard slow-moving bank. He was dealing with my husband. Inside our home office, a sharp, piercing alarm suddenly echoed from Jamal's specialized forensic accounting setup. The primary monitor on his massive desk flashed bright red, displaying a real-time interception alert. Jamal's hands flew across his keyboard with lightning speed, his eyes scanning the rapid stream of financial data pouring across the screen. He tracked the unauthorized ping hitting our firewalls, tracing the digital footprint straight back to the IP address at the Beaumont Estate wedding venue. "Hi is doing it," Jamal said, a low, triumphant thrill edging into his voice. "Preston Sterling is actively trying to wire $74,000 out of your corporate account right now." The absolute arrogance of this man is staggering. He is executing the transfer. I stood behind him, resting my hands on his shoulders, watching the red alert flash on the screen. Preston had just crossed the point of no return. He had chosen to commit massive documented financial theft to save his own ego. He was completely out of options, and he had just handed us the very tool we needed to destroy him. "Let him try," I said softly, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Let us show him what happens when he tries to steal from us." The bright red warning banner flashed across the primary monitor of our home office, casting a harsh crimson glow against the dark mahogany walls. I stood perfectly still behind my husband, my hands resting lightly on the back of his leather desk chair. We watched the digital numbers scroll rapidly across the screen. $74,000. That was the exact amount Preston Sterling was attempting to drain from my corporate operating account at this very second. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man was almost difficult to comprehend. He was standing in the opulent hallway of a historic cathedral, surrounded by furious caterers and unpaid florists, sweating in his tailored tuxedo. Instead of admitting that his family was completely bankrupt, he had chosen to commit a massive federal crime just to keep the illusion alive for a few more hours. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes locking onto the specific routing details displaying in the command terminal. A cold, profound sense of realization washed over me as I recognized the origin point of the data breach. Years ago, when I first founded my crisis management firm, I operated out of a tiny apartment that lacked a secure mailing system. For a brief period, I used my parents' suburban house as my primary business address to receive sensitive corporate banking documents. I remembered the exact afternoon I had visited their house to collect my mail, only to find several crucial banking envelopes mysteriously missing. When I confronted my father, Vernon, he aggressively dismissed my concerns. My mother, Patricia, told me I was being completely paranoid and blamed the postal service. They lied to my face. My younger sister, Chloe, had deliberately stolen my corporate mail. She had ripped open confidential bank statements, meticulously copied down my private routing numbers, and hidden that information away for years. She had always viewed my hard-earned success as a family resource that she was naturally entitled to exploit. When Preston realized his offshore accounts were frozen this morning, Chloe had proudly handed him my stolen banking details. She offered up my livelihood as a sacrificial lamb to save her extravagant wedding. They truly believed I would not notice the missing funds until the weekend was over. They thought I was just a naive, easy target. They were completely unaware that my husband was a high-stakes forensic accountant who built impregnable digital fortresses for a living. Jamal did not take his eyes off the screen. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with the terrifying speed and precision of a seasoned predator cornering its prey. He brought up a secondary window displaying the exact pathway Preston was attempting to use to bypass our banking security protocols. Hi is using a third-party expedited wire service, Jamal explained, his voice low and intensely focused. He is trying to force a direct draw on your corporate reserve line. He knows standard banks are closed today, so he is trying to execute a peer-to-peer institutional transfer to the venue manager's holding account. He thinks if he can just get the digital authorization code to generate, the venue manager will accept it as proof of payment and allow the wedding to proceed. I watched the progress bar on the screen inch forward. The system was currently holding the transaction in a pending state, waiting for manual authorization or rejection from our security firewall. If we simply clicked the block button, the transaction would fail. Preston would receive a standard rejection notification on his laptop. He would realize the account was locked, and he would likely panic, cancel the wedding, and try to flee the city before the authorities caught up with him. I was not going to let him run away. I was not going to let him escape the consequences of his actions. He had terrorized my sister, threatened my business, and attempted to steal my entire future. Do not block it, Jamal, I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any hesitation. If we block it, he just gets a declined message. We need him to fully commit to the theft. We need him to step completely over the line so there is absolutely no gray area for his expensive lawyers to argue about later. Jamal paused his typing for a fraction of a second. He looked up at me, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his handsome face. He understood exactly what I was asking him to do. You want to use the honeypot, Jamal said, his tone dripping with dark anticipation. I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the flashing red alert. Use the honeypot. Let him think he actually succeeded. Weeks ago, when Jamal had first uncovered the Sterling family's massive Ponzi scheme and their offshore tax evasion accounts in the Cayman Islands, he had immediately contacted his closest associate. That associate was the lead investigator for the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the same man who had given me the confirming nod at the rehearsal dinner last night. Together, Jamal and the federal agents had quietly constructed a digital trap specifically designed for Preston Sterling. They had created a shadow account, a completely frozen, federally monitored honeypot that perfectly mirrored my corporate banking structure. The account contained no actual funds, but it was programmed to look like a massive active corporate reserve. Any unauthorized attempt to pull money from my actual business account could be seamlessly rerouted into this federal trap. The moment a suspect initiated a transfer into the honeypot, they were no longer just attempting to steal from a private citizen. They were committing wire fraud directly across a monitored federal server, instantly triggering a severe felony charge. Jamal turned his attention fully back to the glowing monitors. He opened a secure encrypted communication channel to his federal contact. I watched as he typed a rapid coded message alerting the authorities that the target was actively engaging the system. Within seconds, a green confirmation light pulsed on the corner of the screen. The federal task force was standing by, recording every single digital keystroke Preston made from his location at the cathedral. "All right, Maya," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "I am opening the gateway. I am rerouting his transfer request away from your actual corporate funds and funneling his connection directly into the federal server. Once I execute this override, there is no going back. Preston will officially be committing a federal crime on a monitored network. Do it," I commanded without a single ounce of mercy. Jamal hit the enter key with a resounding clack. The bright red warning banner on our monitor instantly vanished, replaced by a smooth scrolling cascade of green data lines. I watched in fascinated silence as Jamal executed a flawless digital sleight of hand. He intercepted Preston's desperate, frantic wire request in midair. He completely shielded my hard-earned money, protecting the payroll for my employees and the operational funds for my crisis management firm. Instead of hitting my bank, Preston's transfer request crashed headfirst into the federal honeypot. On our screen, we could see the exact telemetry of the data flow. The system registered a $74,000 draw request. The federal server silently captured Preston's geographic location, his laptop's unique identification address, and the stolen routing numbers he had proudly typed into the input fields. On Preston's end, sitting in the humid, stressful hallway of the bridal suite, his screen would not show a security warning. It would not show a federal interception notice. Jamal had perfectly programmed the honeypot to return a standard, highly convincing processing message. Preston would be staring at his laptop right now, letting out a massive sigh of relief as a fake green checkmark appeared on his screen, indicating that the transfer authorization was pending successful completion. He would confidently turn his laptop around and show that fake processing screen to the furious venue manager. He would arrogantly smooth down the lapels of his tailored tuxedo, believing he had just successfully outsmarted everyone. He would tell the caterers to start pouring the vintage champagne. He would tell the florists to finish arranging the white orchids. He would truly believe he had saved his perfect, wealthy illusion by stealing from the sister-in-law he had endlessly mocked and degraded. He had absolutely no idea that the processing screen he was looking at was actually a digital pair of handcuffs locking securely around his wrists. "We got him," Jamal whispered, leaning back in his heavy leather desk chair. He let out a long, slow breath, running a hand over his face. "The data packet is complete. The federal server has fully logged the wire fraud attempt. Preston Sterling just sealed his own fate. The agents have everything they need to execute the arrest warrants." I stood in the quiet of our home office, listening to the soft hum of the computer servers. For 35 years, my family had treated me like a disposable resource. They had called me selfish. They had called me difficult. They had demanded my loyalty while actively plotting to steal my livelihood. My mother and father had stood in front of a ballroom full of elite strangers last night and proudly declared that Chloe was their only true joy, publicly disowning me to protect their proximity to the Sterling family wealth. Now that wealth was exposed as a complete and total fraud, the golden child had tied herself to a sinking ship, and the arrogant men who thought they could bully me into submission were about to lose their freedom entirely. I looked down at Jamal. I reached out and gently rested my hand against the side of his face. He leaned into my touch, looking up at me with profound respect and unwavering love. We had protected our empire. We had defended our home. "What time is the ceremony supposed to start?" Jamal asked, his eyes gleaming with quiet anticipation. "The invitation said noon sharp," I replied, checking the sleek silver watch on my wrist. It was currently 10:45 in the morning. We had just over an hour before Chloe was scheduled to walk down the aisle. I turned away from the computer monitors and walked purposely toward the doorway of the office. I moved with a sense of absolute, unbreakable power. The extortion was over. The financial warfare was finished. Now it was time to witness the spectacular, catastrophic collapse of the Sterling family illusion in person. "I am going to go put on a dress," I said, looking back at my husband over my shoulder. "We have a wedding to attend." Let us go give my family the exact gift they deserve. The drive to the Grand Cathedral in the historic district was remarkably quiet. I wore a tailored black dress that felt appropriately mournful for the permanent death of the Sterling family's fraudulent empire. Jamal drove our sleek sedan, smoothly pulling up to the valet stand minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The cathedral was a massive structure of stained glass and towering stone pillars, a place reserved solely for the city's most established elite. Today, it was nothing more than a very expensive crime scene waiting to be processed. We walked up the wide marble steps together, blending seamlessly into the eager crowd of late-arriving guests, who were completely oblivious to the storm brewing just out of sight. The atmosphere inside the vestibule was incredibly thick with the overwhelming scent of thousands of imported white orchids and the chaotic energy of a luxury event teetering on the edge of destruction. I could see the strict venue manager standing near the side doors, looking closely at his phone screen with an expression of temporary relief. Preston's fake federally monitored wire transfer had apparently bought the Sterling family the exact hour they needed to keep the venue doors open. We deliberately chose a wooden pew near the absolute back of the massive sanctuary, giving us a perfect unobstructed view of the entire central aisle and the ornate marble altar at the front. The surrounding pews were packed to the brim with wealthy socialites, politicians, and prominent business magnates who had no idea their stolen investment portfolios were currently funding the lavish flowers surrounding them. The deeply resonant notes of the cathedral pipe organ suddenly swelled through the cavernous space, signaling the beginning of the procession. The excited chatter among the elite guests immediately silenced as everyone stood up and turned their attention toward the back of the magnificent room. The heavy wooden entrance doors swung wide open, and there was my younger sister. Chloe looked like a luxury bridal magazine cover brought to life. Her custom silk wedding dress trailed elegantly behind her in a dramatic sweeping train that caught the brilliant sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. Her hair was perfectly styled, and a delicate lace veil covered her glowing face. Vernon walked very proudly beside her, his chest puffed out with that same manufactured toxic pride he had displayed at the rehearsal dinner. He looked like a deeply insecure man who believed he had finally secured his coveted place in high society. They began their slow, triumphant walk down the long, red-carpeted aisle. Chloe was glowing with victory. She looked from side to side, eagerly soaking up the admiring gazes of the wealthy guests. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her entire reality was a fraudulent mirage. She looked straight ahead toward the altar where Preston Sterling stood waiting for her. Preston looked uncharacteristically rigid and tense. He was constantly adjusting his stiff white cuffs, his panicked eyes darting nervously toward the side exits, rather than focusing on his bride. He truly thought he had successfully gotten away with the desperate wire fraud. He thought the fake transfer had saved him from public ruin. But the sheer paranoia of a guilty man waiting to be caught was practically radiating off his entire body. Chloe was less than 20 feet away from the marble altar when the heavy cathedral doors at the absolute back of the sanctuary violently burst wide open. The crash of solid wood slamming hard against the ancient stone walls drowned out the graceful notes of the pipe organ. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the pews. Everyone turned around in shock. A dozen federal agents, wearing dark tactical vests with bright yellow letters, clearly identifying them as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, marched into the quiet sanctuary. Their heavy boots echoed sharply against the polished marble floor, creating a synchronized, terrifying sound that shattered the perfect illusion of the elite wedding. They did not hesitate. They did not slow down to admire the gorgeous floral arrangements or the terrified guests. The lead agent, the very same relentless investigator who had given me the confirming nod at the quiet restaurant bar last night, strode directly and fearlessly down the center aisle. Chloe instantly stopped dead in her tracks, her bridal bouquet trembling in her hands. Vernon froze completely, his tight grip digging painfully into her arm. She fully expected the armed agents to stop to apologize for the massive interruption, or perhaps ask for me. Instead, the focused federal task force bypassed my sister entirely. They marched right past her stunning silk gown and headed straight for the front of the room. Preston took one panicked step backward, forcefully bumping into the confused priest. The lead agent did not mince words or lower his voice. "Preston Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and actively operating an illegal financial scheme." The agent's voice boomed powerfully through the silent cathedral. Two other agents immediately flanked Preston's parents, grabbing their arms and placing them in heavy steel handcuffs, right next to the baptismal font. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent declared loudly. Utter chaos erupted inside the sacred cathedral. The wealthy guests began shouting, jumping out of the pews in a blind, terrified panic. High society socialites clutched their pearls, pulling out their smartphones to record the catastrophic spectacle unfolding right at the altar. Preston struggled aggressively against the tight handcuffs, desperately shouting for his elite lawyers, who had abandoned him yesterday, but his parents were completely silent. Their faces were drained of all color as the federal agents firmly escorted them down the side aisles toward the waiting black tactical vehicles parked outside. The public humiliation was instantaneous and irreversible. The strict venue manager, finally realizing that the pending wire transfer was a complete federal trap and the massive payment was never coming, immediately signaled his staff. The unpaid vendors, who had been hovering anxiously in the wings all morning, sprang into relentless action. They were not going to lose a single dollar of inventory to a family of convicted criminals. The furious catering staff marched out and began literally rolling the carts of appetizers and towering champagne glasses straight back out the side doors. The angry florists descended rapidly upon the altar, pulling the imported white orchids out of their crystal vases and mercilessly tossing them into large plastic trash bags right in front of the stunned guests. The luxurious $74,000 wedding was being physically dismantled in real time. Chloe stood frozen in the exact center of the aisle, her shaking hands covering her mouth, sobbing violently as she watched her perfect, untouchable future evaporate into nothing. Vernon and Patricia were acting completely frantic. They looked around the rapidly imploding cathedral, their desperate, terrified eyes searching the chaotic crowd until they finally landed on me and Jamal standing calmly in the back row. My parents had abandoned Chloe in the middle of the aisle and sprinted toward the back of the church. Patricia was sobbing hysterically, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Vernon was sweating profusely, his manufactured, arrogant confidence completely destroyed by the federal raid. They practically threw their bodies at me, stopping just inches away. "Maya, you have to do something!" Patricia screamed over the deafening noise of the panicking crowd and the dismantling vendors. "You have to call your crisis management team. They are taking Preston away in front of everyone. This is a total misunderstanding. You have the immense wealth and the powerful connections to fix this disaster. Call a federal judge. Post their bail. Save our family's reputation before the evening news gets a hold of this horrible story. Please, Maya, you are our only hope." I looked at my frantic, begging parents. I looked past them to my younger sister, who had finally collapsed onto the cold stone floor of the cathedral, sobbing uncontrollably into the heavy layers of her ruined, unpaid silk wedding dress. They had publicly and maliciously disowned me less than 24 hours ago. They had called me toxic, bitter, and broke in front of the city's elite. They had actively tried to steal my entire livelihood just to fund this exact fraudulent moment. Now, they desperately wanted me to use the very power they despised to shield them from the severe consequences of their own blinding greed. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely devoid of mercy or sympathy. I looked my parents directly in their panicked, terrified eyes. "I am sorry," I said coldly, my voice cutting through their desperate pleas like a sharp steel blade. "But you are not a client, and this table is for family only." I turned my back on them and walked out of the cathedral, with my husband leaving them entirely alone in the ruins of their own making. The heavy wooden doors of the cathedral closed behind Jamal and me, with a definitive echoing thud cutting off the frantic screams of my parents and the chaotic dismantling of the fraudulent wedding. We stepped out into the crisp, bright afternoon sunlight. The contrast between the dark, collapsing illusion inside the church and the clear, undeniable reality outside was breathtaking. We did not run. We walked down the wide stone steps at a measured, peaceful pace, holding hands. The valet brought our car around. As we drove away from the historic district, leaving the fleet of black tactical federal vehicles in our rearview mirror, I rolled down my window and took a deep, cleansing breath. For 35 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations, their relentless criticisms, and their bottomless entitlement. In a single decisive morning, that weight had been entirely and permanently lifted. I looked over at Jamal, who kept one hand securely on the steering wheel and reached out to intertwine his other hand with mine. We did not need to speak. The silence in the car was not empty, it was full of absolute, untouchable freedom. 6 months passed, and the catastrophic fallout from the cathedral raid played out across every major news network and financial publication in the country. The federal government did not just arrest Preston Sterling and his parents, they systematically dismantled the entire Sterling real estate enterprise down to its very foundations. The indictments handed down by the grand jury were staggering in their scope. Wire fraud, money laundering, corporate embezzlement, and operating a massive international Ponzi scheme. The offshore Cayman accounts that Preston's mother had so arrogantly bragged about in the country club restroom were fully seized and liquidated to pay back the hundreds of domestic investors they had callously defrauded. Preston, the man who had sneered at me across a restaurant table and threatened to destroy my crisis management firm, was currently sitting in a federal detention center, utterly stripped of his tailored suits and his unearned superiority. His elite old money legal connections completely abandoned him the moment the federal asset freezes went into effect. Without stolen capital to pay exorbitant retainer fees, Preston was forced to rely on an overwhelmed public defender. The prosecution was absolutely ruthless. Armed with the meticulous forensic accounting data Jamal had provided and the undeniable audio recordings I captured, they built an ironclad case. Preston and his parents were denied bail due to extreme flight risk. They were currently awaiting trial, facing decades in federal prison without a single sliver of hope for a lenient plea deal. The untouchable Sterling dynasty had been permanently reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. But the most devastating consequences were reserved for the people who had willingly tethered themselves to that sinking ship. My younger sister Chloe quickly discovered that the elite high society life she craved so desperately came with a catastrophic price tag. When she arrogantly signed her name to those fraudulent $2 million commercial loan documents believing it was just creative financing, she legally bound herself to a massive federal crime. The authorities did not care that she was wearing a silk wedding dress when the raid happened. The Internal Revenue Service and federal prosecutors launched an intense microscopic audit into every single aspect of Chloe's financial history. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her passport was confiscated. The wealthy socialites who had attended her lavish bridal shower immediately blocked her phone number, completely cutting her off from the exclusive circles she had sacrificed her own sister to join. Chloe was facing her own devastating legal battles, desperately trying to prove she was an unwitting pawn rather than a willing accomplice. The golden child had finally met a problem our parents could not simply scold away. Our parents. Vernon and Patricia finally got the elite high-stakes drama they had always wanted, just not in the way they anticipated. When Chloe's legal fees began to mount at a terrifying rate, the very same parents who had demanded I hand over my hard-earned wealth were forced to face their own financial ruin. Vernon and Patricia had to take out a massive third mortgage on their suburban home just to keep Chloe out of a federal holding cell pending her trial. Their precious social standing was completely obliterated. The local community boards Vernon proudly served on quietly asked for his immediate resignation. The country club where Patricia spent her afternoons spreading lies about me permanently revoked their membership, citing the massive public scandal. The perfect, successful family image they had ruthlessly manufactured and protected at my expense was completely shattered. They were left sitting in a heavily mortgaged house, drowning in legal debt, watching their favorite child face potential federal prison time. They had bet their entire future on a fraudulent illusion, and they had lost absolutely everything. They tried to contact me, of course. My office received dozens of frantic voicemails and desperate emails from Patricia, begging for my crisis management expertise, pleading for financial assistance, and demanding family loyalty. I never returned a single call. I had permanently blocked their numbers the exact moment I walked out of that cathedral. They were no longer my problem. I sit now in the quiet sanctuary of my corner office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the sprawling city skyline below. The afternoon sun casts a warm golden glow across my polished mahogany desk. The past 6 months have been the most professionally and personally rewarding period of my entire life. My firm's value has more than doubled. The flawless surgical execution of the Sterling family takedown became a quiet, highly respected legend in the corporate world. High net worth clients, politicians, and massive tech conglomerates now pay triple my original retainer fee because they know exactly what I am capable of. They know I operate with absolute precision, unyielding integrity, and a total refusal to be intimidated by arrogant predators. I built this empire with my own 2 hands, surviving the relentless toxicity of my upbringing to forge a reality entirely on my own terms. The heavy glass door to my private suite opens softly. Jamal walks in carrying 2 steaming cups of dark roast coffee from our favorite local cafe. He is wearing a sharp-tailored navy suit, looking just as formidable and handsome as the day he walked into that dimly lit restaurant and shut down Preston's lawyers with a single folder. He walks around my desk, sets my coffee down perfectly on the coaster, and leans against the edge of the mahogany wood. He looks out at the city skyline, then looks down at me. A slow, brilliant smile spreads across his face. There is no tension in his shoulders. There is no looming threat hanging over our heads. There is just the profound, deeply earned peace of a battle decisively won. We protected our home, our business, and each other from people who thought loyalty meant surrendering to abuse. I pick up my coffee mug, feeling the comforting warmth against my palms. I lean back in my ergonomic chair and smile back at my husband. We do not need to say a word about the past. We do not need to discuss the people who tried to destroy us. Our present is far too beautiful to waste on memories of toxic individuals who simply could not comprehend our strength. We chose each other. We chose integrity. We chose to build a life fortified with absolute trust and competence. The extortion attempt was meant to break me, but it only solidified my power. The family that demanded my loyalty received exactly what they deserved: absolute silence and the devastating consequences of their own choices. I take a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. There is no toxic family left to manage. There is no manufactured drama left to navigate. There is just the sweet, quiet, untouchable success we built together and the entire, brilliant future stretching out right in front of us. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic to protect your own peace and success? Let me know your story in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries, demanding respect, and reclaiming your power from those who try to bring you down. Thank you for listening, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting the empire you built.